think we're ready to go ahead and start, folks. So, we are starting the Finance Committee meeting for the State School Board on November 3rd. And the first item we have is approval of the previous meeting minutes. Does anyone have any inputs or comments on them?
Motion to approve.
We have a motion to approve. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? That motion passes. We are on to item 1.2, recognition of progress, achievements, or improvements. Natalie, can I turn that to you?
Yes, so Deborah is going to put up on the screen some additional reports we've been working on with state finance. I'm unsure how useful or exciting you may think that they are, but there was raucous, exciting tears in our office the other day. We've been able to form a really great partnership with our friends at State Finance. We tried to get them to come today so that we could give them the proper recognition. One of the individuals that we've been working with is actually retiring soon, and we will greatly miss her expertise and assistance. She's helped us create the board report that you have in your packets this month. Again, do you want to talk about the board report a little bit before we go into contracts?
So the board report this Monday will be the first time we run with auto distribution. So on Monday, everybody should receive an actual email with October's actual board report, which would normally be reported in the December board meeting. So hopefully that'll give you enough time to review it over the entire month before we actually reach that board meeting. And give you that opportunity to see if you have any concerns or questions and maybe get those resolved beforehand. Anything?
You'll receive two files. One of the files is just a general PDF. And these same instructions will come in the email that you'll get, so you don't need to remember them all. But the other file is an
MHT.
An MHT. It opens up and it looks just like a PDF, but it has the blue lines in it, and when you hover your mouse over it, you'll get a little pointy finger. When you click on that, it'll drill down to all the information, so all the individual transaction levels, program levels. So again, if you have questions throughout the month, if there's a transaction you want some more information on, please let one of us know, or Deputy Jones, and we can pass that information along to you. We're hoping that it would give you more time to study and reflect on the information we're providing, and obviously that then takes less time in these meetings. So, the other thing that Deborah is going to show you, even though you can't really see it very well, our state finance friends have been working on contract reports for us. I know those of you who have been around for a while know that contracts are a process that we continually evolve and improve every month. We are now able to utilize the power of FINET and creating purchase orders and tracking all of our contracts in the system, so we don't have to manually track everything on spreadsheets, which is huge for us.
So this is our overall contract. I believe this is 8 pages long. It's every contract, active contract that we are currently in. She has drilled down fixtures over here. If you click on the actual contract number, it brings up all the details of the actual contract, when it was actually first initiated, and every amendment from year to year, what was added to those amendments and what the new contract amounts are. The other feature that she has is over here in the expenditure side. You can actually drill down to all of the payments that we've actually made to them. That looks so terrible. And it breaks it up by fiscal year, when they were actually paid and what the amounts were. So it'll make tracking contracts a whole lot easier.
She's also provided us a report that shows, has kind of a risk-based a timing as to when contracts expire. So we'll be able to get ahead of those rather than rely on our manual filing system, which doesn't always work.
Yes.
So it's actually pretty huge for us. There were tears. It was a great day. So happy to this. So I think that's about all we have for improvements.
Natalie, on these contracts, sometimes I'm guessing if they're not up to expectations, not doing well, there's sometimes options in the contracts to terminate early or terminate for performance. Is there someone kind of minding that, looking at that? Can you share an example maybe where we've done that in the last year or two?
The only examples I can think of are current ones, so I probably don't want to share those right now. But we do have the ability, especially as we have done a better job with creating contracts, to use some of the state approved or create our own terms and conditions. And most of the contracts that I've seen lately, if not all, have standard terms and conditions that provide for cancellation, whether that's for performance, for cause, or I believe there's some terms that are just notice related, right? I know that we've been having a lot of conversations with our contract managers. As you know, our procurement director has left and our new one starts on Monday. We're also hiring another individual who will manage contracts from the aspect that you're talking about. We've been having conversations about putting some training on for individuals who are the responsible party on the programmatic side to get some training and assistance from those who create the contracts as to what their options are, how they should be monitoring. We've also enacted internal controls within the finance division that review contract payments for appropriate terms. They work back and forth with the program managers to discuss whether the contractors have met the conditions to receive payment. And we've also really been enforcing, as we create contracts, clearly defining what the deliverables are, which is not something that we were really great at in the past. A lot of our contracts were quite vague, and so it was very difficult to hold vendors or our individuals with contracts accountable for what they were required to deliver. So we've been spending a great deal of focus thinking about those things as we've been creating contracts. That's all for this item.
Oh, okay.
Can I ask just another question on now? We're still on recognition of progress, achievements, and et cetera. Isn't that where we're at?
Yes.
Okay, a question I have, and we haven't heard anything for a long time, and it seems like there's this little bit of a push on the IT side of having them on programs and finishing programs, managing everyone's expectations. Is that still evolving the way that it's supposed to, or have we hit?
I think that
I've heard anything for the longest time, and it was like really a hot topic.
Sometimes no news is good news, right? No, actually, I can speak to, we've had a couple of huge wins with some of our IT products lately. The UCAP system was developed and put into and implemented this year. That was largely brainchild through our charter school section, but we used it to collect charter school projections this year in an electronic fashion. That gave us the ability to do a few things. One, to require everyone to respond, which is not something that we had in the past. And then that brought up a lot of questions and issues surrounding projections when we do the budget, which you'll receive a report on later. It also created an audit trail so that we were able to see when individuals posted those projections in and who posted them, and it kind of gave us more information. That system then fed into our MSP automation system. So within the last few months, we've actually been able to link two of our existing systems together, like an actual link, not just, kind of the way it had been done in the past. And those charter projections were used in the MSP automation system. Automation is up and functioning right now. We were actually able to use that system to run projections alongside our manual projections this year, everything tied. That was another great day in our office. We were able to use that to check all the programs that have been programmed so far. And I'd say of all of the programs that we have to do the budget for within the next week, we were able to check everything but voted and board and the local replacement calculation, which is pretty substantial. We feel like we're having great cooperation with our IT group. There's a renewed energy and excitement for finishing the projects that we've started. I believe that on our end, at least, I'm seeing more efficiency and greater communication, which has been a really great asset for, I think, for the whole building, not just for financial operations.
If I may, I would just add to that. This is Cindy Dixon, State Superintendent, for the millions who are listening online. I think one of the things that Deputy Jones and Director Jared have
Felt.
I know, I was going to say right, and I knew that was not the right Jared. Director Felt have engaged in. One of the problems that you heard about early on was people going directly to somebody in IT and saying, I need this project done, I need that project done. So they've really worked on a very strategic workflow wherein not only are people assigned to the various sections directly, but we also have a workflow of prioritization. So that will come to our level, and that whole reorganization under Jared's direction I don't think you'll hear about those problems anymore, because we will control that prioritization in concert with IT. So great improvements by having Jared at the helm.
Thank you. I don't believe we have anything else under 1.2. Thank you very much. Move on to 1.3, section budget reviews. Natalie?
Okay, so for the good of the board, we have two sections that are reporting today. Assessment, we have individuals from assessment here. Jared, you can invite Jared up. We're also reporting on data and statistics. At my request, assessment has actually not put together or we haven't put into the board backup and don't plan on covering today their overall section report or their carryover report. Assistant Superintendent Nilsson is new and has been in the office, I believe, 5 days now. He and his staff were dutifully trying to work on this presentation and get it ready for you, but as we reviewed it yesterday, we felt that we needed a little more information from us, and we wanted to give them the time to feel prepared to make a presentation to you. So for this month, we just wanted to cover their current budget report, see if you had any questions, and then we'll bring them back next month to provide their report and provide more information about their carryover balances that they would like approved. Do you have questions? So without further ado, this is assessments budget for the period ended September 30th, 2017. I know largely, most of our large assessment contracts don't come due until the end of the year. I know this is generally a focal point for most of the year as to why assessment has large carryover balances or why are large balances in their budget that don't get expended. When those bills come in, they are large, and we generally pay them towards the end of the year. So just keep that in mind as we're looking through the assessment budget. Again, because this was September and carryover has not been approved, carryover budgets are not listed in the board report. We believe that those will most likely be approved for setup sometime this week or next week, maybe through the governor's office, maybe later today. As we reviewed through, there wasn't anything that was particularly concerning on our side or anything that we felt needed to be briefed by exception. So unless you have questions or comments.
I just have a question about the assessment to achievement budget. Is that an ongoing program?
Or do I need to? Sorry. Jared Wright with the assessment coordinator. From what I understand, that will be ending this year.
Oh, so these are just funds that have carried over from the original
Yeah.
chunk of money that was set aside.
Janet and Whitney.
I'm just having a question about, we have assessment to achievement, administration, assessment to achievement, blah, 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 assessment to achievement, and there are different program codes. Can you kind of translate what all those assessment to achievement lines?
So assessment to achievement, so you've got federal funding, you've got state funding, so the A to A is state funding. The A to AF is federal funding. Where's the other one? And so then if you look just a little bit further down, you've got the A to A F again, that's actually 17 funding. So you've got different.
Got 2017 funding?
Yeah, there's 16 and 17 funding.
So effectively,
Which is in
there
the
were
second column over, so.
right. So there's no budgets in those columns right now because we don't have the authority to set up the carryover budgets yet. When we get those set up, those are effectively funds that were prioritized for that purpose in prior years. Either they have contracts or obligations against them for the most part, I think. These are a lot of the questions that we wanted to have answers to you for regarding what the obligations were against the carryover balances, and because of the turnover in assessment and the newness of the assistant superintendent, we didn't have time to do proper research. And so if you do have questions that you'd like us to be prepared to answer next time, we'd be happy to take those and bring back responses.
Go ahead.
Yeah. So just as a follow-up, so you're saying that the budget is blank for all the top ones, and so then there's 1.3 million down for just the assessment to achievement under 2018. And so my question is that just mean that those carry forward funds will probably fill in those budget blanks in the future?
So typically, we can load the carry forward balances into FiNet, but ultimately, at the end of the day, until the governor's office gives approval, state finance cannot approve them to be uploaded into the system. So until they push that magic button, they will not show up on here.
So, one of the things that we found as we transitioned to FiNet is that we had the capability to do a lot of things in our old accounting system that did not necessarily comply with the Budgetary Procedures Act. Now that state finance is governing, and governing isn't the right word, that state finance has more transparency into what we're setting up and how we're setting it up. We have to follow the rules. Yesterday, during our legislative brief, I brought an issue forward that we are requesting an exemption from portions of the Budgetary Procedures Act. That would likely address some of these issues. Largely with our federal funds and even with our state funds, they're non-lapsing. They don't get swept back in their education dollars that are restricted specifically for education. Really, the only funds that could get swept that we have are potentially those that come from the general fund. And it is such a tiny, I mean, I think it's probably like $300,000 or something. We don't get a lot of money from the general fund, with the exception of those funds provided for Carson Smith. So again, there's not a lot of reason that it would necessitate us to follow the rules. We do, of course, because that's what we have to do. It's a law. But when we brought that issue forward during the legislative brief yesterday, we would like to pursue the avenue to be able to set these funds up. Right now, our LEAs they're making expenditures on federal grants that we awarded them a year or 2 years ago. We are paying them, we are drawing those funds down from the federal government, but we're not allowed to set up the budget, so it looks like we're kind of going into the negative right now. We have verbal approval from finance to do so because of this unique situation in our transition, and so we're working to fix that, if you will. Again, the carryover funds, unless they are obligated by some kind of contract or previous service that had already been enacted, they do need to be approved by you. And so that's why we did not approve assessments budget or carryover last month when we presented carryover, because we didn't have the information necessary. We didn't have time this month to get that prepared either. And so again, before assessment has the ability to make any further obligations on those funds, they would have to bring that to you.
Just a couple of things for other board members that see this, and this is where when they get into finance, and they look at it and they go, I do not comprehend. I don't get it. And so even at my level, the question was brought up on all of this assessment to achievement. Is it possible to, in the header in the first column, to have a little more information than what's stated there? And then you're waiting for invoice to get a lot of bills in at the end of the year, and they're encumbered funds that you have contract. Is there a way that you can show what that is on here? Because this is great to show the activity that happened in the quarter and that, but as things come to us and we're approving budgets and as we're getting these numbers, it's nice to say, well, how much is committed and when is it gonna slide in? Eventually it's gonna come in. And I know that's difficult, but if we had round numbers.
So on the carryover reports that we presented last month, we showed the carryover balance and then what was encumbered against those funds. Yeah. And the amount that you approved for additional obligation was the difference between the two. And so largely what you're seeing here in this expenditures to date is things that had already been paid for, purchased, obligated in the old fiscal year that we're just clearing out. And again, this is just the end of September. So
they're included in the expenditures today.
Right, that expenditure column. We don't, right now, we're working as we do our transition to FiNet to be able to create encumbrances, like you indicated. There are some complicating factors with a few of those things that we're still trying to work through. So while we can encumber contracts, and we do encumber those, and large items that have to follow procurement, a lot of our day-to-day things don't have that same capability in FiNet right now, and we've been working with FiNet and the programmers for FiNet to figure out a way to do that. Also, transitioning to the grants management system will enable us to have that information at our fingertips. So largely any of these grant programs or programs where we are reimbursing LEAs or paying LEAs for grants, we'll have the exact amount of encumbrances every month, once that is set up and running in the system, so.
Thank you.
Brittany?
So, under the different, as you scroll down to the last page, we have the dual immersion assessment and the online formative writing tool. These are something that's provided at the state level, but they're not required, is that correct?
That's correct.
And then the electronic elementary reading tool, is that Dibbles?
Uh-huh, yeah.
Anything further? Janet?
So, a couple of questions. You said the carryover budgets were not yet approved. Who gives you that approval?
You do.
Didn't we do that last month?
You did that last month for every section but assessment and SAS. We still have some issues to work out with their obligations and with some of the moves that the sections have made to settle in on what the actual obligations are, what we may need carryover funds to be approved to be used for.
So you're just waiting for those. Okay, and then I don't understand what FASTER is. I recognize NAEP and I recognize a bunch of these others, but I don't recognize FASTER.
FASTER is, so we had Kim Rathke attend a SCAS for formative assessment, and part of that, she was able to apply for a grant to be able to help with this FASTER or formative assessment out in the LEAs. And so this FASTER is a grant that came from WestEd and can't remember the other group from this SCAS to be able to be used as she kind of got formative assessment out in the schools.
So which schools get to use that? What level is it at?
The way she got it out there was through the Assessment to Achievement platform that we already had, so we had schools participating in that. So,
Do you have, like, these elementary, junior highs? Which schools are?
I can get you that information. I don't have the specifics, but it's all of the above. It's
No, I'm
elementary,
just looking for
secondary.
general information about what this does.
So the, it's elementaries, it's, so a person from each school that wanted to participate in this grant has been meeting with Kim and doing some trainings. They also had iPads and the swivel machine, I want to call it. It's not the right word, but you can put the iPad in it and then turn it on, and you can video yourself teaching to kind of get feedback. So the idea was that teachers could use this to video themselves teaching, to watch it themselves, maybe have colleagues view it as well to give them feedback on things they might want to improve on or things they're doing well. And so those teachers then took these machines back to their schools and have been using those to record and.
So it's assessment of teachers, of teachers for teachers, not assessment of students.
Right,
Is that
right,
correct?
right. It's to allow teachers to give themselves feedback and peers to give themselves feedback. But it's not graded, it's not any of that. It's not for, we've been pretty adamant trying to get across that it's not for teacher evaluation. It's just to allow them to get feedback on their own teaching practices and to help improve their instruction.
Thank you.
Anything further? Thank you very much. Concludes item 1.3.
So it sounds like there's a pretty bad accident on the freeway. Our data and statistics coordinator is on his way, but he's going to be a few minutes. If you want us to do his budget, and then if you have any questions, we could ask him later, or we could wait until he's able to get here. I'll leave that up to you.
I think we could go on to some of the other things and then circle back.
Okay.
We're going quite quickly. I think we'll probably plan on taking a break at 9. So the other ones can go. But why don't we move to nominating committee update, item 1.5.
So there are times,
There are times certain.
times certain.
Oh,
But the individual from DFCM is here to answer your questions, so we could do 1.4.
DFC.
oh, we could do 1.4. Well, 1.4 was next, I'm sorry. So, but you said the data person was gone?
So the next budget, we have 2 budgets on the budget
Oh.
line item. The next one is data and statistics, and he's the one that's running late.
So we'll go
In
back to
1.3.
1.3. We'll go back to 1.3.
Oh,
Let's
so
do
we did-
1.4. We didn't finish 1.3.
We didn't finish 1.3, I'm sorry, I thought you meant for 1.4. I'm slow this morning.
That's okay.
Okay, let's go on to 1.4, and we'll circle back to 1.3 as we need to. Natalie?
So it was, we were asked in the committee meeting last month to bring, and I'm sorry, I can't remember your name. Jake, to bring Jake from DFCM. The committee members had questions regarding our operations and maintenance contract. And I believe Cammie might have some things to fill in if she wants to add anything. I believe that there were just some general questions regarding when we have you approve carryover budgets and we're making improvements to the building, why doesn't DFCM cover those? I know last month that you discussed and I think approved the operations and maintenance agreement with DFCM and had some general questions about what that covered. And so Jake has come to kind of give us a brief overview of what that operations agreement covers.
Good morning, I'm Jake Jacobson with DFCM. As Scott and Cammie and I spoke, it sounds like there was some confusion on to what the operations and maintenance agreement was. So what an operations and maintenance agreement is basically to take care of the facility as it is. So anything that's an addition, a change, or a modification to that facility, because it's basically an agency charge. And the reason we do that is so that we have a pretty set standard of what that maintenance is, and we know what those ongoing costs are, so that as we can project our budgets for our fees to you every year, we know what that base is. The things that come in, the changes, the modifications, those types of things, those are add-ons. We're here to assist, and I don't charge for my time to do that, but we are here to assist in doing those, making sure those things meet code. The other part of that is there's also a capital improvement budget, which is anything that's greater than $10,000, or they call it a capital renewal. That's for items that have reached life cycle. Life cycle is based on the type of equipment, the use, and the ongoing functions of the equipment and facility. Some of those things may be like your walkway, the bridge outside. That's one of them right now that is out for capital improvement. It's requested, it's funded. I actually have a meeting next Monday with the engineers, because there are some code changes that have taken place since that was constructed. So we have to put a landing and stuff in there. So that's capital improvement funding. That one's getting taken care of. The railing around the place is also capital improvements. That project, I don't remember the exact number, is about $300,000 roughly. So, are there any other questions or anything I can help? And I also have this up here if this is helpful to you. I can go through the line items with you. I think it's the same commodity codes you use, or line item codes you use. So my personnel costs are my total, which is the top right there. If you look at 5101, that's actually my direct labor. That includes maintenance and grounds. And then the benefits and everything are down below that. If you go down, you can see the janitorial contract. It's $86,000 a year. You can kind of see where we're at. Anything, this is just a link right now for you, or a PDF. This is on my website. You can drill into it. It's live data, so you can see where I'm at any given time. But 6141 or 6142 is my janitorial contract. That includes the cleaning, paper products, all of those things. We can go down further. I'm just hitting the key ones. So 6171, which is all commodities that we purchase, lights, tubes, ballast, those types of things. And then you have your utilities, which is your big one right there. And the utilities they're interesting to watch, because you can see where we're over and under, and you can see it can be heat, it can be gas, or your heating or cooling load is based on ambient temperature outside. Right now we're actually sitting fairly well as a whole. On the utilities, we've made some changes and sitting pretty good there, so. And then that's pretty much it, really. I mean, unless there are other questions that you may have.
This building is getting older, and I appreciate that we want to use taxpayer funds as best we can, and we should keep, yesterday during our state school board meeting, the elevator was being fixed. And I think the elevator is, several generations old.
Yeah.
We don't even have a good stairwell for most people to take the stairs even. Like, I don't even know if I know entirely how, I guess they're way over here. It just seems, how much should we reasonably want to use this building? Another 5 years, another 50 years?
I think that's really gonna be based on what your needs are. As the Board of Education expands, grows, programs change, I don't know that the current structure, the current facility meet your needs. I think this building's actually poorly designed, really for your function. So, but in all, it's actually not a bad building. It's a typical building that was built for a 30-year lifespan. We're at 30 years. This building has met its lifespan. But when you look at total cost for renewals, they call it a facility cost index. And typically, this building, I think, is running about 22, 23 on that scoring. About 36 is when they kind of look at, hey, we need to do a different building, we need to do something else. But that doesn't mean that still meets your needs. That goes back to that feasibility and what are some of the things that you need as the board and for this building function, and is it downtown, is it, do you need more square footage, do you need additional conference rooms? Those are all things that have to be looked at, but it's not things that I look at on an operations and maintenance function, so.
And
How are you?
We all get to come for a few days a month, but Superintendent Dixon, I think, is here much more and is aware of things. How well are things working? We want our staff to be functional and happy, Superintendent Dixon, and how well is even DFCM doing?
Well, I will say that Jake is very responsive. When we call, things get done. I think when we get in this queue, and I think you've addressed that a bit, that with prioritization, that's sort of the frustrating part for us. We never really know where we are on that queue. So, for example, just kind of give some examples and non-examples. So, we had a sprinkler problem this summer, and you all know that our non-flower bed, you looked at that, it was dry. You could look at the trees from above. If you were up in child nutrition, you could see that they were dying, the lawn was dying, and it was a situation where somebody came and fixed a sprinkler, and then I think they even left the agency and didn't bother to tell anyone that we had a broken sprinkler pipe or something. Anyway, it went on, and it was just this lack of communication from one thing to another. So Jay came over, and we had a crew, and they just spent, I think it was about 2 days here and got everything fixed. So what we're trying to prevent is the crisis mode, that we have to wait until something breaks, and that's where that queue gets a little challenging of prioritization. So our railings that are rusting, the holes in the cement coming into the building, the cement and the steps coming up into the side on admin, those are priority right now. They're on a priority list. We were hoping to get that done before the snow flies, and that hasn't happened. So I think that's the challenge we have, and it's probably a challenge for you as well, because we're part of this really broad agency, and do we call it the efficiency model out of GOMB? Success model, I think. So I think one of the challenges all agencies face is in trying to consolidate services. Now one person is in charge of a lot of places, or one crew has to be assigned to 10 places. I think that's just personally speaking, I'm frustrated by that model, that we don't have a crew that's just sort of assigned here. And, but
Do we even have a full-time janitor on site?
we do. We have a service, so we have we have a morning and an afternoon crew. So 2.5 or 3? How do we count it? 2.5. Yeah, so inside the building, they're doing the daily cleaning, but it's the major maintenance that we need help with. And the carpet, you can see, I know we're on a repair list somewhere.
More capital items, yeah. It's
Yeah.
the maintenance side of things, the day-to-day function is actually very good. I do have maintenance staff that's here every day. So we do have that dedicated crew. I also have the grounds crew, but they do take care of several buildings, and that's where we saw some of the issues there earlier this year. When we get into the capital renewals and capital requests, which is the handrails and those, basically what is the way the rules and the laws are written is it's all state assets have to they get a capital improvement, and it's 1.1% of total asset value, and that's how they fund that. And so state buildings get about $45 million a year, and higher ed buildings get about $55 million a year. That $45 million a year is divvied out based on the percentages that each agency's departments have of that total. So let's say you were 1% of that, you would receive 1% of the funds. But that includes here, that includes Libby Edwards, Schools for the Deaf and Blind in Ogden. And so that's where that capital improvement comes. So you're constantly fighting those other needs as well. We do the same thing. We're fighting them also, and that's funded through the building board.
And who prioritizes this?
We actually sat down this year and did it for here, Schools for the Deaf and Blind, and for Libby Edwards. So I sat in it, Scott sat in it, I think you sat in it, Candy.
And that's for our items.
Yeah.
So are you asking about the broader?
The broader picture's done through the building board. So, yes.
So when you say it's allocated based on based on the asset value, so for example, the value of this building would be determined and I'm not a realtor or anything, but a building as it ages loses value, correct?
It does, but the property still gains value. So
The pro-
once we've set up that value, and we actually have them appraised,
Uh-huh.
so it's based off of appraised value, and that appraisal's done, I want to say about every 5 years.
Okay, so a building, a brand-new building that's right next door to us would be valued higher than an older building, which needs more capital improvement as it ages. And so it seems a little bit backwards
Yeah.
where we get less money for improvements and fixes on an older building than a newer building that's valued higher.
Right.
So where is that decision made on how to?
Usually on a new building, so there's one more component to this, and it's actually a third-party assessment done by a company right now that has contracts paid for the rule. So they'll come in and they'll look at a building, and they'll go through and assess all of the major components. They're actually assessing everything that's about $2,000 and greater. And so they'll go through and assess all of the components of the building. And then they'll determine what that FCI is and what the funding cycle should be, or the request cycle should be for each of those capital components. So that is done, every building is required every 5 years. So that kind of addresses the new building because we don't have to make certain requests for new buildings. So we'll have agencies like Department of Human Services that have a fairly new building, but we don't really put any capital improvements to that building. They do still get some value out of it, and that's kind of that base funding. But there's also items that if it's critical need, like a life safety, fire alarm, some of those types of things, those actually come off the top of that as well. And so some of the older buildings do tend to rise above it. I do make those requests. If there are items that I think are critical, I'll push them. And a lot of times we'll get more funding than what the agencies really are allocated based on that percentage-based funding. So hope that answers your question. That's kind of how it's addressed.
Can I ask one quick follow-up? Is that okay? Sorry. So if a newer building is allocated a certain amount and they don't need it or use it, what happens to that funding?
A lot of times it goes right back into that same pot that's reallocated somewhere else.
To other buildings?
Compete.
Yeah.
I've got a couple things, and I played my card earlier about competing. We, it's a bunch of us, as we go into other state buildings, this one's an embarrassment. I'll just be that blunt.
No, I appreciate that.
Can I be that blunt and bold? You're chairing.
Yes.
Kick me if I'm getting out of
I
line.
appreciated you saying it. So.
And I compare this to UDOT, I compare this to a lot of, even to the point where you don't have a lot of public going in and out of them, armories and other things that the state has. So my question to you, I'm not putting you on the spot, but the question, but I am a little bit, what can we do on our end to to better compete against those other buildings there to improve this one and/or that, so that's presently. The other thing is yeah, this is a 30-year-old building, is that what I understand?
Roughly.
And it still can be a great asset to the state in some capacity. But when and how do we get to the table? Do we talk to the building board and say, hey, we want to reassess what we are doing as services and that to get on a priority list or start the dialogue early and be proactive in taking care of our employees in this building and then all the other guests, education partners that come and go. So it's a two-part. What can we do now with this facility to up the stakes or find ourselves? Is it a lobbying thing, or do we just have a lot of meetings with the right people? And then you also said something about higher ed gets something
55 million, yeah.
and a little higher than this. Is there a way that we can get this building slipped into the higher ed side of things? I'm asking a lot of questions.
No, you're fine. I was just going to answer that last one real quick. If you did that, you would actually keep competing with all of the higher education facilities as well for the funding. So it's not that they get a greater percentage, it's that they have more square footage, more asset value. And so, and I'll be the
And they
first
win.
in saying,
I don't know one higher ed building well, I don't know of one higher ed building that's in worse shape than, worse layout shape as this one right here.
Yeah.
So maybe we would get some sympathy points.
I think layout's terrible on this building, I really do. The building, like I said, it's a
Well, the transportation things, you
Yeah.
walk upstairs, so let me just throw an example. This would never fly in higher ed or UDOT, but you walk from that main entrance and go, let's see, yeah, from the parking to, is it 200? This is
500.
to 500. And that floor would not exist in any higher ed building that I know of, or any UDOT. It wouldn't exist. And I think you guys all know what I'm talking about. It's not quite like a trampoline, but there's some fun little stuff that happens with that, just with the floor.
it's a wood frame building, yeah.
Yeah, but there are things that can happen to strengthen that floor, but it's like, this is just my observation. Apparently we're not proactive enough to deal with even that. When we had the governor here not too long ago and his people, and he had his security and stuff, they actually like, oh, what was that on that floor? We and our staff get used to it, but so what do we need to do? I'm just after a takeaway of being, what can we do more of or better to
I
better
think
represent ourselves?
what really needs to happen is you need to look at that feasibility. You need to look at
That's
what
the
your.
FCI part?
Well, that's the facility cost index.
Okay.
But you need to look at the feasibility of what your future needs are. So start forecasting out. It's usually about a 4 to 5 year process to receive a new building or to get a new building approved through
You
the
did a
legislative
different
body.
building, right?
So this particular building, I don't know that I would put that much money into it because of the way it actually doesn't really fit your needs all that well.
I think our main issues though are around safety
Yeah.
initially, because we're at this point that to try and reconstruct a floor or a wall, I mean, it's all cosmetic, but we would just like the safety issues taken care of. And I think one of the things that's been beneficial to have Jake on board, our needs were being prioritized without our input at one point. And Deputy Jones and I were at a meeting where we finally learned in a public meeting on the Hill about how the process works, and we looked at each other like, there's a list, there's. So it was really helpful to be able to sit down with Jake and to find out more about that list and how we now at least have a voice to say, let us show you where the safety issues are. Here are the cosmetic issues, but here are some safety issues, and if we can just get those prioritized, you know, not that my shoe collection matters, but I've ruined more than one pair of shoes just walking into this building. Now, you may say, well, that's just your own klutziness, but it's just a lot of the potholes and spaces and, you know, and twisted ankles and other things, and so we're really just trying to deal first and foremost with safety and security issues, of which we have both.
Yes, Member Phillips.
So I appreciate, I know there's been some changes this past year, but at the same time, would encourage your staff to be a little vigilant when you see something dying, that somebody might want to say, hey, that asset, poor plant's dying. And there is this, just that landscaping is the cute, is probably the best eye candy, besides our staff, I guess I'd say, that are coming along in this building, and their cars or whatever's going on there, but they, so I appreciate your attention on that. So the takeaway, I just want to get a takeaway here is we could be talking feasibility. Are you our advocate?
I will work with you on it. We actually have a separate side of DFSAM, which is our construction and improvement side. They have somebody, our real estate manager, and they'll start looking at that with you. But I think it's really gonna be more understanding what your needs are for the future, you know, in that 3, 5 years, 10 years from now, to start looking at, like I said, possibly a new building or additions, or I really, personally, I wouldn't really do any additions on this building. I think it could be, another state agency could use it probably fairly well, like a DWS or something. But there are things you can look at. You can look at locations, you can look at what those needs are and how your expansions and growths are, and what type of programs that you're bringing in or anticipate to bring in, and start to look at the technology and the new buildings and where those locations can be.
Okay.
So,
Brittany, then Janet.
And this is just a cobweb of a memory that I can't remember, but it seems like Dave Thomas, several years ago, put on a budget request a feasibility study, and it seems like it was like $6 million. Is that just
Yeah.
was it 1 million?
It
So
was
is this, as we look at this feasibility, is there a $1 million cost to look into even just?
that I will have to check on. We actually have funds up at the Capitol that we can use for those types of things.
Okay.
But it's
was
more
an
of the other needs that we need to understand.
It was an independent?
It was an independent
Okay.
look and not through this facility.
And we did have some folks come in, I know both under Superintendent Shumway and Superintendent Smith, I believe. We had a team of people come in and look at what our needs might be in projecting out. And one was there was a collaboration at one point to try and get several agencies into the possibility of building a building. That was maybe 2 or 3 years ago, if I'm remembering correctly. So I think there've been 2 or 3 sort of mini studies done, and I don't know that we've had to dedicate money to it. So if I may, Mr. Chair, that's a question I would have, if we could maybe pursue what would it cost and how much time would it really take to just even look at what the current possibilities are.
Well, and if I may add to that, we actually have to go through, we're doing a feasibility right now, we're just getting ready to start one for the Department of Health. They're located up at the University of Utah on university property, but in a state building. And we have to relocate them and turn the building over to the university, probably about 5 to 10 years from now for them. So if commingling with another department works, that's certainly an option, and we could look at that and do a larger regional building, even with the Department of Health. And then that will kind of help cover some of those costs. Again, like I said, we do have funds up at the Capitol for that purpose, for feasibility studies, so.
If I could, the state building, or Jeff Redor,
Yeah.
he works for the
State Building Board.
State Building Board.
Yeah.
is there any advantage for us to be talking to them at this point, or is it better off to just, okay, let's start pulling all this assessment through DFCM?
You can start talking to him, but he's gonna tell you, get the information together, get with the FCM, let's do the feasibility on what your needs are.
They'll get the same.
It'll come right back, yeah, so.
It'd be nice to enroll, and there's the health side of things, the safety risk. Is that all part of the
Yes.
assessment?
Yes, it is.
And that- Right, I'm satisfied. I know where I need to go.
Can't believe you've been so quiet.
I know.
I know, but I had my.
Oh, sorry.
And you said I could be a.
Oh, I did.
Go ahead, Jen.
Yes, thank you, Jen.
Okay, welcome to my world.
So, some years ago, I went to a higher ed building board meeting, and the different higher education people presented their needs. And it was like the saddest meeting I've ever been to, because they had pictures of things crumbling and rotting away, and it's just so decrepit and so sad. So that's the higher ed portion, that they get the 55 million to deal with all those kinds of needs.
For capital improvements, yes. Capital development, capital improvement are two different things. So capital improvement is anything over $10,000 up to $2.5 million. But it doesn't include new space. Anything that is new space is actually capital development. And all of those have to be prioritized, presented in front of the building board.
Okay, so ours would be new space.
This would be new space.
This would be new space. And we would go, would we go to a similar meeting? Is it the same building board
Yes.
that makes all these decisions? And there would be a meeting that, maybe, could you inform us of when those meetings are, so that we could at least begin to go and see what kind of needs there are and how we might present our case?
Yeah, absolutely.
So that would be helpful. And then I just want to make one other comment. Over many years, that garden out there has been spectacularly beautiful.
So this year.
I know, it was such a shock this year to see these poor little marigolds that were just dying on the vine. But I will say, it's been something that's made me happy every time I come in, because, and they said the state did that.
Well, it's amazing how we need water to grow those things.
Yeah.
Given there was
Indeed.
no water
No water.
coming in. Yeah.
Indeed.
So,
Okay, so you'll let us know when those building board meetings are, and we may want to assign a board member or two to attend that, or just go and retrieve some information on how we might put together a presentation or what we're looking at.
good.
Thank
Be
you.
happy to.
So I work in schools and I understand how all this works, and it's not unfamiliar to me. But the fact that all of us have to crawl under tables to plug our computers in every day, and this cord right here with the tape on it, that's a huge hazard, you know? I mean, I know that sounds silly, but that would never fly in a school, like with kids, and I don't understand why, as adults, we need to just say, oh, this is an
It's
acceptable
okay.
response, you know? I mean, that's a tripping hazard, and
Yeah. And I
And a
noticed
fire
that as I
hazard?
walked in as
Yeah.
well. And it can be changed. That goes back to that, if I'm given
yeah.
direction or somebody asks me to do that, I can do that. That's those types of items that become the chargebacks, or those are the items that we ask you to pay for.
Well,
Because they
I-
are changes, additions, or modifications to what's already here.
But I think we're almost getting to the point where not to code anymore. I mean, we don't have enough outlets, we don't have, I mean, it's just, I think we're almost obsolete.
Yeah.
So, I wanted to point that out. We should have videotaped you. Calling around. and
Calling around.
Evidence number one.
Put that on YouTube.
It's a little pride. And right now in Kagan's district, they're asking for a $283 million bond. And one of the 5 reasons they're asking for it is they want to do upgrades at several schools to bring in more natural light. I mean, there's the concept now, maybe it wasn't so much 30, 40 years ago, the natural light
Right.
increases the productivity and happiness of employees, increases, I mean, I just think on so many levels, the productivity of our employees and the esteem and influence of the state school board would increase, you know, with this. So I appreciate Superintendent Dixon, you fighting for the marigolds.
Well, I would fight to never plant marigolds.
They're a hardy plant, they just need a little drink now and then.
They have
This
other
is-
issues, they bring in other things.
A long-term thing, but I think it will substantially move the State Board of Education operations, what we want to do, forward. So I appreciate your advocacy on this, and I'm sure everyone thinking, I think it is that we ought to get a feasibility study in on that list. I think it really should probably be in our top 10 priority list. If that happens, I think we'll need to throw some elbows to
That's
ever
what
get on the
Jake's been,
list.
we've seen a lot of improvement with Jake on the tab, so we really appreciate
You know,
him.
one significant one, and thank you, when somebody said, "Let there be light," was that you that brought it? In the parking lot?
Yes, yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah,
A lot.
yeah,
Wow.
that was a
Big
push.
difference.
We actually paid for that one out of this building, so we did do that one.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, I think we've talked about this probably all we can.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, appreciate it.
1.3, did you make it?
Back to 1.3. Mark, you need to go. 9 o'clock.
Okay. Just looking up to make sure I have enough in those committees.
Chair Huntsman is gonna go check on the other committees and then rejoin us. Just so this,
I'll be right back.
but can we say where Scott Jones is?
We
It's
can
top
say that
secret.
he's on military duty.
Okay, that's all we can say, that's
In a battle formation somewhere, so.
very cool. Very cool. Probably in natural light, so.
Yes.
Kind of interesting. The president flew out too, so I wonder if they're together.
Okay.
Just teasing. Starting a rumor.
All right, so we are certainly now back to 1.3. Natalie, why don't you direct this, or?
Yes, so we have Aaron Bruff here, he's the coordinator over data and statistics. I apologize, I can't remember, did you want Aaron to go through his PowerPoint presentation? I thought we were just putting them in as backup for information purposes.
Yeah.
I don't think we want to go through them today, correct?
That's
Okay,
fine.
perfect. All right.
That was our intent.
All right, well, we will prove right or wrong then. So we've put up on the screen the current monthly budget report, or the budget report as of the end of September. Again, for your perusal, if you have any specific questions, I don't know if Director or Coordinator Bruff has any points he wants to bring out.
Nope, unless you ask.
What are the one or two things that are going well, you're particularly proud of?
Quite a bit, but my team is over the audits of the October 1, the December 1, the year end. What we do is valuable. When I say valuable, I mean lots and lots of people use the information that we get in there. And we've changed the process for about 6 years ago, where it was, well, whatever gets in here, and everyone was kind of different, where we've used my section to really consolidate the data flow, build up the consistency of good quality, and we're finding the errors as early on as we can and getting them fixed, having that communication back to the LEAs, having communication back into our IT section, communicating with the finance department, working with all the other departments, saying, hey, here's the data and information, try and get it to them as fast as we can. And I think we get it in a very timely manner. So I'm going to say one of the best things that we do is we are, I'm going to say, a great service to most of the sections here and to all the LEAs and what we do. So that's one component. Another component we oversees the data gateway. The success of that has been a lot of educators are getting into it, using that information to get down into their student level information, whether there's a comparability between LEA to LEA from school to school, and they know that information is basically gone through all the rigors of the audits. Some great things going on there. We are working obviously with multiple agencies, with the UDRC, what's called the UDRC, the Utah Data, Research Center, I think is what it's called now. We're moving in that direction. We have a grant on that. We did have the new contracts for every were approved yesterday, and money will be flowing out of that very shortly, but there's a lot of work to be done inside of that. If you ever wander upstairs to our section, I have a board full of things, just like Natalie, just like every section, just, you know, there's lots of priorities, lots of work to get at. But my team does a fantastic job. So.
Natalie and Kathleen.
And I want to bring this up because Erin is here and Jared is here as well. I was going to bring it up in agenda item number 1.8. We were asked is probably the best word to use, requested to find ways to improve the October 1 headcounts and make them faster. We had been told that if we can't speed them up, that to enable us to get headcounts in quicker so that we can turn the budget around quicker, that there were members of the legislature, if you will, who were going to change or work towards changing our October 1 headcount dates. As you know, it's a particularly, this time of year is quite stressful. There's a lot of things going on for not just us, but for our LEAs as well. Aaron and his staff took upon themselves, along in coordination with our IT staff, to find ways to do those audits quicker. And as a result, I know that there was a little bit of pressure on everybody's sides, but we came up with a process that I think worked fairly well this year. We started doing some pre-audits with the assistance of IT, because they're always, those staff, without information, data and statistics can't do their jobs and we can't do ours. We had coordination meetings earlier before the headcounts came in to talk through how we could escalate timelines or pull data sooner, start looking at it sooner. We were able to get every LEA in by October 1. We only had to open the collectors up one time this year. We usually freeze the system, and we freeze it out for a long time, which has impacts on assessment. We didn't have to shut it down for as long this year, is that correct?
That's correct.
Which in turn helped with some of the school grading issues. It helped with getting assessments out to our LEAs to be more timely. And as a result, we got headcounts and audits done, I'd say a full week ahead of schedule. We have had more time on the fiscal side to review data, to look through corrections. Data and statistics staff have caught a couple of fairly substantial errors. We were able to work with the LEAs to get those things resubmitted and corrected in the initial uploads so that we don't manually have to change them on the back end, which is huge for us because in the past we were manipulating spreadsheets to bring in these really substantial pieces of data. All of those things at the end result in funding for our LEAs. And so I feel like we've created a pretty good process this year. Aaron's staff does miracles with the 2 or 3 of them that crank through all of the audits that are required for the 160 LEAs that we manage. Our IT staff had to be on staff working overtime and holidays to help the LEAs complete all their submissions. It was a process that seemed to go really well this year, even though there were, you know,
It's not perfect. But
it's
yeah,
not perfect, and we definitely don't have enough people to accomplish it at the time of year, but it was a huge improvement, and we probably should have talked about that in improvements this morning now that I think about it, but it was massive, and I think that it will help us to ensure that we don't have legislative changes that would have more substantial impacts on our LEAs.
So in the top box, it says funding sources, and there's the 4 lines, and so are those the 4 places that this section receives funding?
Yes.
So administration, is that just general state board funding through the state? And so is that the money that's used for all the side projects like data gateway, et cetera? Is that?
Basically, the administration is almost 100% to personnel on my staff. All the side projects, when you say side projects, we just squeeze it in, and there's really no funding
It's just the
available.
staff
It's just
funding.
saying, hey, let's figure out, okay, here's a priority. How are we going to get this done with the current team without, you know, there's no new funding to develop stuff. We just figure it out.
And so then the other 3 programs are just program specific, so the time spent specifically working on that project, or?
So for example, you look at the state longitudinal data system, that's the grant, that has allocations to 6 agencies. Basically, we house that funding and then we send it out. We all have responsibilities behind it, and a lot of that money's already been allocated, but it has to do with, you know, researching and taking a look at paths of students, especially into higher ed, into workforce services, the effectiveness of the different programs. So we're working on that, those components. We do have another, the Utah Data Alliance and the Utah Futures component. That basically is the state funding, and for the longitudinal system, I have 2 people who are on, actually 2.5 people who are paid through those fundings. And then the early warning pilot is a new program that we're working on right now. We're right in the middle of the RFP review. Again, it's just a pilot, so it won't be statewide, but we'll put on that for 2 years and then evaluate and give it back to the legislature saying, here's the effectiveness of this program.
What are we warning about?
It's early prevention from dropouts is what we're looking at.
So that's dropout prevention.
Brittany and Natalie?
And so this is the purchase of a software product, is that? what-
It's a combination of both internal work that needs to be done and then purchasing of a vendor to come in and to team up with, basically with our agency and then with the LEAs who would pay for half of it to go in and to implement this software system, warning system, make sure all the data is flowing into it in a timely enough manner that a teacher or principal or a counselor could be notified, for example, in the first quarter, hey, someone, in 9th grade, if they're a deficit on credits or if they're starting to slip, it identifies that student so they can put resources into working with those students, keep them engaged. That's, that's the process behind it.
So I just wanted to point out, so the program codes that you're looking at, and we can provide, we had actually talked about providing a list so you can see what the revenue sources are. In the past, so the state longitudinal data system, that's a federal grant. In previous chart of accounts, that would have been separate from our state funding, but probably the rest of these 3 below that would have been combined together. As Erin indicated, the early warning pilot, that was a specific bill that passed that had funding attached to that. And so we record that as a separate program so that we have a trail as to what happened with those funds. The reason we're breaking some of these programs out, and I know it makes them a little larger than they had been in the past, but it enables us to track either the cost centers or, so like if additional funding were prioritized from the board for data and statistics to do something new or different or create something that the board desired, and that was money that came from the board's budget, that would go into the administration line. Or if you requested, we would create a new program so you could track that. Again, like in the past, the administration, the data alliance probably would have been combined together. And so we wouldn't have been able to track back without a lot of forensics thinking through to figure out how those specific lines of effort were separated. And so this is our effort to, I know it does get a little confusing because there are a lot of them, but as we're running queries or trying to respond to the legislature, it's much, much, much more efficient for us to track it this way than to lump everything together.
What is that SB 34 Data Alliance?
So, basically, I'm trying to think if that was the first or second, it was the state government taking the original Data Alliance concept, which was funded by a federal grant, and then saying we are going to sustain and support this effort. And so
So was there a bill? Is that Senate Bill 34?
Yes, from 2000, I want to say 14. I think that was, I could be off on the year on that one, but.
Is that the backpack bill?
No, it's, again, this is the data, it was called the
Oh.
Utah Data Alliance, and then last year, there was a new bill, I don't remember the number on it, but basically it changed the structure of the Utah Data Alliance to the Utah Data Research Center, where we're moving.
The meta data research.
No.
That's a different.
Again, this is 6 agencies, so we're talking K-12, we're talking early childhood, we're talking the technical colleges, higher ed, workforce services, UETN used to be a part of this. It was moved, the data center was moved from there over to DWS. DWS is contracting with DTS, sorry, acronyms, but, and so it's the combination of those information to be able to say, all right, through aggregates and through different research, how are our programs working? How are we moving, if you will, all of our education programs, are they being effective into getting our students prepared for higher ed, for workforce services and such? vice versa, they can do other comparisons between it. So.
So in that data alliance, the portion of our expenditure is just kind of our participation in that. Do we participate in any of the analysis of data, or do we just?
Absolutely.
And who prioritizes what will be researched or analyzed, and then who does the research?
So there's two components of who prioritizes the work. The first one is we have a current grant with 13 objectives on that grant, and it's about research. So that was pre-approved 3 years ago as we presented that, saying this is what we're going to go after on this grant. So that's one set of priorities. With the new structure of the UDRC, it is now under the House of DTS to prioritize DWS, Department of Workforce Services, where it is now housed, where they have the director in charge of that research component. And they have then the researchers that'll be housed there, and they set those priorities. Can we influence those priorities? Absolutely, because we have cross communication all the time. Hey, what are the priorities? What are the first things that we want to be working on? And obviously if the board says, hey, we want this research done on something like that, we can instantly present that to that group and say this becomes a priority from our agency that we want research, and we can bump other things out of the way.
So, your PowerPoint is really informative, and I think you should all look at it, because it answers a lot of the questions we were asking about the research center. You guys do a great job. I've used the Data Gateway for years. It's amazing. I think that as we start moving forward, data-driven research and data-driven decisions are essential, and we should look at everything that works and everything that doesn't work, and how a teacher's doing and how a school is doing, and I think that's really important. But we did get an email from Howard Stevens with a data backpack, and my understanding when I talked to somebody else is that there's a lot of LEAs that are on track with that. How can we assist getting more of our LEAs to be compliant with that one? Because I'm concerned about that email.
Is it still there? I know she's responding.
Oh, okay.
To that email, we've gathered information. Superintendent Jones asked me to get the initial information behind it. I've been working with Jared Felt on gathering that information. We know exactly where it's at, the expenditures of the amount, the money that was allocated. The project is, on the IT side, is done.
Yeah.
So the backpack works. To get the LEAs, well, I have my own opinions on how to get all the LEAs involved with it, but part of the complaint that's come back from the technical individuals is saying, hey, there's no funding to go to their SIS vendors and say, recode or allow it so we can gather this information. So there's been a little bit of apprehension behind it. But the mechanisms are up and running. Any SIS, and when we say any SIS, we know that Skyward has asked for the documentations behind it. The Davis components have asked for it, and Power School has asked. I don't know if the development Spireworks, because it was plugged in initially. So I know that there are requests to receive the documentation. I just don't know the level of implementation in the SISs, because we can't, from my perspective, I can't go to the LA and say, you must do this right now. There's no funding.
Because they have to work, our LEAs have to create APIs, right, to feed in. So some kind of communication interface between the systems here and the systems at the LEA level.
and
And those are not cheap
No.
to create those APIs. And there was no funding allocated to LEAs to complete that task. Is that fair?
Yes.
Can I follow up with that? So I understand how each district is using different SIS systems, and how Aspire and SIS systems have been talking to each other. But if we could look down the road a little bit and see how maybe we could have prevented that by asking for certain things in place ahead of time. As we move down the road, is there some way we can facilitate at this board, because I know that Utah School for the Deaf and Blind actually just bought a different SIS system as well for $1 million. And to me, I'm like, why are we doing that? Like, and I know that we want local control in our districts, but how can we mitigate this issue? Because now we have another SIS system that has to talk to Aspire for us to get this data more effectively. So how can we assist in helping that process be more fluid? Does that make sense?
Yep.
Yeah, and how can we assist you guys in getting the funding so that we can have the data to be as best and as fast as it can be? Because it's great. Like it should run our budgets. We should be working with effective things, and we should be trying to get rid of things. And the only way to tell is by this data.
The answer, it's complex. As you meet together in the board and talk about local control and,
Yeah.
and state control and who's gonna, it's a complex issue. Funding, obviously, anytime legislature comes up with, hey, we want to do something, and if they do not put in allocations for the LEAs to adopt it, that's a problem. And so it's just being mindful of, hey, what type of implementation will this require? If it's going to be across every single agency or every single LEA, then that should be addressed, definitely.
I'm sorry. Do we have recommendations for SIS systems that we can have in place so that we're saying,
Yes.
Okay, great.
We do have a list of 9 SISs that are approved to work within Utah because they do communicate with the SIF, the SIF agencies for gathering all the information together. And so they have to be on that. Again, there's some complex issues around that, I'm sure that you're aware of.
Thank you so much. I appreciate all you do.
Anything further? Thank you. We have now completed our 1.3, 1.4, we need to wait 1.5 until 10. And I'd like to take a break probably about 9:45, 9:50. So, Natalie, can we go to 1.6?
Absolutely. So you will find in your chair at your place a copy. This is a draft. We being just finished this last night really late. So this is the product of the school level report that we discussed at length in the last meeting. Largely, this is an intent. This is the requirement that came out of House Bill 331 that requires the Board of Education to assess the ability to report at a school level per pupil expenditures and various aspects of that. The requirements were set forth in House Bill 331. As we began working on this project, the requirement to have a per pupil report is also part of the state's ESSA plan. And so we combined, like we indicated last time, the requirements into one sort of methodology so that we would have a report that would enable the board to fulfill the various measures and performance goals that is set in the strategic plan, that would fulfill House Bill 331 requirements, and that would also be able to be used to report all the information back to the federal government as it pertains to the federal programs that we have. There is currently no recommendation in state statute for us to start doing school level reporting. There is a requirement in December of 2019 to report on school year 18-19 as part of our federal accountability. So basically the summary of this report is we believe we have identified a methodology to do a school level report. It's not perfect. We're harnessing the transparency submissions that our LEAs are already making so that they're not required to do additional data collection. We've spent the last year standardizing and clarifying points in our chart of accounts. We already had a standardized chart of accounts, which is a great platform to spring from. We've added location codes. Location code was already there, and there were many LEAs that were using location code. But how every LEA uses them is a little bit different. And so we've talked a lot. We had work groups. We worked with the business administrators and accounting committees to talk through the implications of creating these reports. From the LEA perspective, if we really require them to go down to the level of how much gas each school bus uses to get kids to a specific elementary school, they would have to hire teams of accountants, and that really doesn't seem to, the data itself is not economically sustainable. And so we believe we've come up with some minimums that have to be reported at the school level, which include instructional staff, their salaries and benefits, non-instructional staff, and supplies and materials that are consumed directly at the school. And we believe we've come up with some allocation methodologies that would allow us to allocate other things across the individual schools based on a head count. We think that will enable us to come up with a somewhat consistent report. Obviously, data is only as good as what comes in from our LEAs, and so we continue to work on that. We've put some validations in our UPEF system. Basically, the big takeaway is that we believe that we probably do have sufficient time to provide some training to our LEAs and clearly describe how we want to compile this report. The barrier on the side of the State Board of Education is we don't currently have access to the transparency data. We have to access that through state finance. We currently don't have a system to pull all of that in and calculate the report. And so we're working with our IT and data and statistics staff to determine if portions of the data gateway could be utilized, if we need to build out our UPEF system to have further capability. We have about a year to figure those things out, and so as we go through and continue working on, I guess you'd call it a feasibility study, there may be some requests or additional funds that may be necessary to get this up and running. But largely, we feel like we've come up with a reasonable methodology that will obviously burden some of our smaller LEAs who have a single accounting staff, and we're trying to mitigate that as much as possible. But we feel that the data yielded from this would be beneficial. It would help accomplish various data collection requests that we have, both from the board, from the legislative aspects, from research, to provide additional information about uses of funds in public schools.
Kathleen?
I work in a school, and I think it's great that we're trying to figure out where every penny goes, but at some point, we're spending so much money trying to find out where every penny is going is that we're wasting pennies. And so, at what point do we get to critical mass, or is this gonna start to flow into place? Because I have a budget for my computers, and for me to spend that money, I have to talk to like 6 different people 7 different times. And then I have to re-talk to them again 7 different times. So I do think that transparency is fantastic. I do think we're moving in the right direction. I love that we can drill down and see stuff, but are we getting to the point where all of our infrastructure is in place where we can start flowing? And maybe as a group, we should start thinking about, it is nice to know how much money is spent on every kid. It is nice to know, but when we do these things, we're also creating a situation where money is being taken away from kids and being counted to excess. So is the infrastructure there now, and we're gonna start to go into the easy streets, or are we still working on it? Because I can tell you, I have felt the pain tremendously at my local level.
Well, I think that there are actually more LEAs than I thought that were already using the school level code in their own accounting systems. Largely, they were being asked some of the same questions that you ask at the local level, that this board might ask at a local level. And so there are LEAs who we feel, based on the methodology that we've established, could probably report today a school level report. Now, that doesn't mean that their data is perfect.
Yeah.
There are LEAs with different circumstances all across the state. You have some schools or some LEAs who have a centralized kitchen, and all of the expenditures for the food service program get dumped into a standardized food service cost, and then meals are ordered or delivered out into the various LEAs. Our expectation is not that every single meal would be scanned and we would know exactly how many peas are on the tray. I mean, that just seems to, like you indicated, like at some point it costs more pennies to count the pennies than you have pennies. So in those instances, the standard, or the consolidated food costs would just be allocated across all of the LEAs based on all of the schools based on a head count. We feel that that's probably just as reasonable as counting every single dollar. And so we've tried to really limit the amount of things that have to be recorded at the school level. So right now on page 5, there's a list of the things that must be recorded. School level instructional staff salary and benefits. Teachers are located at a school. And we realize there are circumstances where teachers may rove between a couple of LEAs, and have had conversations with our work groups about how boards or districts may allocate those costs. We currently have employees here at the Board of Education who are charged out of 2 different grants. And so there already are mechanisms in the current accounting structures and the chart of accounts that allow for that. And to some degree, that should already be occurring. School level non-instructional salary and benefits, most schools have administration. I would think most schools have some kind of a support service person or a secretary that's helping with some of the day-to-day functions, tracking children, those kinds of things. Individuals who are actually at a school should already be recorded at that level. I think the districts have a concept of who is at their individual schools. So we don't feel like this would be a massive change. However, not every school not every LEA allocates the benefits back down to the individual schools. And so that's a barrier that LEAs would have to work their way through. Supplies and materials consumed at the school level. Again, if there's a standardized supply warehouse and those supplies are being charged out, some of our bigger school districts already have inventorying systems that do this. If we have an LEA who doesn't have that capacity, then we would just allocate those costs across the individual schools. We're trying to find ways that we could math it out, if you will, so that our smaller school districts don't have to hire 3 people to code transactions. But in doing so, in order to math it out, we have to have a program to do that. Included in your example, and I actually changed names and data. We used a school district to calculate. We found someone who was willing to let us put school level accounting or use their data to create these reports. I have modified that data so that this district didn't have concerns, and so I've changed things, I've subtracted things, I changed names, I changed data points, I changed FTE. So at this point, this is just a dummy example. There is really no such thing as Moab Elementary or U of U Middle School or Narnia High. But so just so you know, this is an example. We didn't want to profile anyone. But there are some inherent, as we ran this individual report, there were some inherent pieces of data that looked weird and looked strange. And so one of our desires is that we would have the ability to calculate these reports. There's over 1,000 schools. We can't do that manually. That's crazy. That we'd have to hire 2 people just to calculate school level reports, which isn't efficient. But we feel by setting consistent guardrails and constraints as to how an allocation would occur, we already believe that using the standardized chart of accounts, our LEAs have to report to us using an object code structure, which is similar to what we have here at the state, and a function code. So we have a transportation function code. We have a food services function code. If there's no location code tagged to those function codes, then we would just allocate that out. But I believe that's going to take some programming work to calculate that out, but we feel that that is a better use of resources on a statewide level to create a system that would do that. Using data that our LEAs are already providing, we feel like we can manage that here at the state a lot better than pushing this requirement out to our LEAs, and we feel that that would yield at least a comparable report. I'm not saying that every LEA records their data the same or makes the same decisions about where they code their janitorial supplies or their pencils, right? But as much as we can, we'd like to standardize that report. And so this is kind of the product of that. We're definitely not ready to release any kind of reports this year. We have a couple of years still to kind of work through that, which also includes providing whatever resources we can and training we can to our LEAs. We're continually taking feedback from our LEAs about things that we've missed. This hasn't been presented to our LEAs for their feedback. We wanted to do that before it's presented. It is on the agenda for public education appropriations on Wednesday. And so I believe I don't need any action. This is an information item only for the board. What my request would be, because you did receive this late, none of you have had a chance to look at it. It has been reviewed by the superintendent and Deputy Norman, as well as Jill Curry looked through it and provided some feedback. If you could look through it perhaps this weekend or next week early and give us some feedback of things you'd like changed, we'd be happy to make those changes. We'll be continually, I will hope to send this out in draft form to our LEAs, at least those that participated in the work group, to see if they feel it fairly reflects the work that happened over the past year. But again, this is an agenda item for public ed approach on next Wednesday.
Brittany, I'm going to ask a few quick things. Natalie, are other states collecting data at the school level?
Interestingly enough, we have been participating in a nationwide group. It's called the FitWig, and I don't remember financial something transparency work group. We were actually pleasantly surprised we thought we were probably going to be one of the states that was farther behind in being able to implement some of these things. And we found that we're actually we're clear over here. We have a standardized chart of accounts, which some states don't. We are actually collecting data, at least at the statewide level, from our school districts, where a lot of states don't. There are some states who get no reporting whatsoever from their charter schools. And so they're trying to figure out how to bring all of that in. And so even though it sounds like we still have a lot to go, and we do still have some substantial work to complete, and there are resources that, again, just like with the last discussion, there is no funding provided to the LEAs or to us to put this together right now. But I feel like we're far ahead of some of the other states that we listen to who are at the moment just trying to figure out how to standardize their chart of accounts. You know, obviously having a standardized data collection, I mean, it doesn't matter how good your report is. If everyone's not reporting data consistently, then you don't have any kind of, I don't want to say comparability, but that's one of the risks that we identified as we worked with this work group, is that whether we like it or not, schools will be compared. And we felt that in this report if you look at the back, there are some other indicators that we tried to place on the report to help provide context to the information that's being provided on a per school basis. Total enrollment is important, grade band is important, numbers of students who, or the population of students in totality that are economically disadvantaged, or individuals with disabilities. The point of having that as context is that largely additional resources are devoted to populations. NES, we don't have NES on here, but we do have schools who receive NES funding because they're necessarily existent and small. So they may only have 13 or 15 students, and the amount that is being allocated per student will be gigantic compared to what an elementary school down the road might get. And largely that's because they receive additional funding based on some kind of eligibility criteria. And so trying to find a way that we can provide that additional context without profiling those additional that context has been a challenging aspect. Not providing too much information. This report is largely focused, and I think that really the business administrators and our principals and superintendents will find this information useful. This specific example is too much for parents and the public. It's way too much information. And so we've also been engaged with the school report card group that's designing the state report card to determine how we could disseminate some of this information in a simplified form so that it's not overwhelming to parents. And again, we're still kind of working through those design elements as well. So.
All right, a quick question about Brittany. You know, some school districts claim they're already doing it. And so it shouldn't be that much harder. Is that, I mean, you know, like Alpine, Granite, Davis, that, you know, are enormously big. I don't know how they allocate resources without doing this. If they aren't doing this at all, that's what truly frightens me. I mean, are they already doing this? I mean, how do they allocate resources if they aren't already doing it?
So we found an LEA who was already doing it that was reasonably small, that we could work with to understand their data. Obviously, trying to understand an Alpine school district's data in a short amount of time is not practical. And so you're correct. I have heard that there are LEAs who are already doing this and can already complete their own report. We had a lot of questions about what they were doing with transportation costs, what they were doing with food service costs. How do the capital expenditures show up in these reports? There are inherent differences between LEAs who bond or who have property taxes that pay for buildings versus those LEAs who lease. A good chunk of our charter schools lease their buildings, and where those expenditures are recorded are in two different places right now in our accounting system. And that's okay, because that's the accounting standards that are followed. Some costs are capitalized while others are expensed, just based on the kind of legal document that backs those transactions. And so we do have some work left to go. HB 331 asked us to report on teacher turnover. The ESSA recommendation is that we also have like an average salary of a teacher. We're still trying to work on, we don't have those data points here at the Board of Education at all right now. Or if we do, it's not with any kind of fidelity. We do have some information in Cactus, but there is a lot of other things in Cactus that may preclude us using that data. We're still working on some of those data collection points and clearly defining them. So,
Brittany?
Yeah, so on page 5, it kind of just highlights the general areas that you're looking at. And then I'm guessing you followed those for your examples district here.
Right.
And so on the example, it pulls out teachers specifically and other teaching services. So does that mean like a paraprofessional or an aide would be pulled out differently? Because on page 4 it says school level instructional staff salary and benefits. And so
So-
are those separated?
So, kind of, again, we realize this is not perfect. This is a lot of blah, right? This box down here are school-specific expenditures. So those would be the teachers, non-instructional staff could potentially be paraprofessionals. There are various function codes, and Todd could probably assist me a little better than, I'm not totally versed in all the detail, and my staff that put this together are both out of the office today. There are various function codes and object codes that clearly delineate between instructional teachers, between paraprofessionals, and so putting those object codes together in the group differentiates it. So instructional leadership would be separated. I believe instructional leadership is administration or trainers. Is that fair? Okay. And that would be different from, obviously, we have a teachers category. Other teaching services, I think that might include special education services or services required for instruction. And I could give you the definitions if you're interested in digging into any further. I didn't think anybody wanted to see those, so I didn't put them in.
Yep.
Just one more thought. You mentioned that this is too much data for the general public, and I would maybe say it might not be, because I think it is, because there really isn't a whole lot of information on here, but it is helpful, to have, what is it, the difference between a teacher and what we're paying for guidance, counselors, and instructional materials. And so I really don't see it, and I know you're working on making sure it flows better or whatever, but it is helpful information. I think the delineation between the different areas is helpful as a parent, as a person from the public. So.
Okay. I mean, one thing that I think has been alarming at a number of our schools, is someone will donate money, say, to the boys wrestling team. And the principal has no idea what to do with it, or there might not be, and so it just goes, to the coach, and there's no reporting, so no one can see, oh, someone donated $5,000 to the boys wrestling team, all of a sudden, are they getting preferential treatment or something like that? I mean, it seems like donations of anything over certainly $500 should be disclosable. Is that the case right now? I mean, I really welcome kind people who donate money to our public schools, but is there a way to go list and see where those donations are and what the source was?
Well, I think that's largely a question that would be best answered by our LEAs. Obviously, any revenue that comes into a public school becomes public funds, and there is requirement for recording that into an accounting system, following protocol for deposits, utilizing those funds appropriately, and following procurement rules. One of the questions that we had and that I was reminded of as I was creating this is we never really got to having a conversation about where donation funds and activity fees, that some of our LEAs collect all of their
Donations and
fees.
fees,
Yeah,
yeah.
some of our LEAs collect all their fees at the district level and then allocate funds back out to the schools. Some of those are collected directly at the school. And so we have that differentiation. Neither is wrong, neither is inappropriate. It's just the way the LEA has decided to do business. We're going to have to work through that too and determine where we expect to see those revenues and expenditures showing up. One of the requirements of the ESSA report is that we're able to present how much state and federal resources are dedicated to each school. And that's something that we're still working through. As you can imagine, like a great example is our school foods program. There's a match requirement that the state of Utah fulfills using liquor tax revenue. So every dollar that we send out to our school districts as a reimbursement for the food and the meals that they serve is a component of federal reimbursement and the liquor tax money. We don't require people to coat their bags of flour 100% liquor tax or 100% federal grant or 2020. That would be ridiculous. And so trying to figure out, what percentage of those revenues are supporting the school food program, we can definitely do that by an allocation, but the detail is too difficult.
Is there any provision right now to collect data on donations or the fees we're charging students at the school level? so that that would be searchable, findable. Like we could say, the boys wrestling team got a $5,000 donation from J&J Tire, or the girls soccer team charged, $1,500 per student, and only 40% of the students paid that amount, and the other 60% did not. And that's kind of data I think decision makers and people at local school level really need, and is not being disclosed. People know that information. Some people know that information, but not the public, and I think the public needs that information.
The short answer is LEAs are required to reflect the activity. Whether the actual detail right now is generally the public disclosure for most of our LEAs is transparency.gov. If all the general ledger transactions, individual fees are rolling through the district's general ledger, then that information is available publicly. If not, if it's being recorded at the school level like in QuickBooks, and the QuickBooks activity is then being loaded in summary format to the district, that summary transaction is showing up in the transparency load, but the detail isn't. And so it just depends on what systems. Most of our elementary schools don't have a system. They have a spreadsheet, and most is probably a terrible characterization. Some of our elementary schools don't have a system. Their fee activity is very minimal. Largely, they can't collect fees unless it's for field trip or extracurricular things. And so it all depends on how the LEA is doing business. And right now, no, there is no rule that I am aware of or statute that requires every single transaction to be loaded up. The activity has to be loaded.
So, and there's no intent to make that a requirement right now.
I think that there would need to be a careful cost analysis. That would require systems at the LEA level. This is where Scott would chime in and go, ERP. We don't have that functional capability at a lot of our smaller LEAs, and even some of our larger LEAs. The reason that some of our LEAs have chosen to purchase a different student information system is because it does have school accountability or fee tracking. And for them, they have the resources and the willingness to implement that at an LEA level. Some do not. Right? Currently, I don't believe our Aspire system has the student accounting and fee tracking mechanisms. I think that's something that the user group would like, but that's an additional cost to develop those things.
I think even if I filed a grammar request in any of the high schools in my community, I don't know if they'd have this data, which would seem to indicate no one's looking at it, or even only the people with conflicts of interest know it and aren't disclosing it. I hope you're right. Debbie, you came up, want to say something, please?
So Debbie Davis, Director of Internal Audit. As everyone is very well aware, we're doing an audit of school fees right now. And I think the information that we're getting from that audit, the way we've set it up and planned, we will be bringing information for you to consider for policy decisions. So some of the things you're talking about, what should we do, what direction should we go? But that audit will definitely help inform, provide information so that you can make those decisions. So we're still a few months out. We're gathering data, we're analyzing it right now, but the audit has that intent. And I think everybody's aware, hopefully the legislature, the Legislative Audit Subcommittee has also prioritized an audit of secondary fees. So there's legislative interest in this as well. So we're having discussions with them. We don't want redundancy in audit. But so you're aware more additional information will be coming on this in the next few months.
All right, well, we'll see if I'm still here in 3 years, but it seems like we're moving forward on this. Like in Alpine, they recently released, because there's been debate about closing schools in Orem, we're spending $5,000 or $6,000 per kid in Eagle Mountain. We're spending $7,000 or $8,000 per kid in Orem within the same school district. And kudos to Alpine for releasing that and explaining the challenges. Maybe they're just using it to justify, closing schools in Orem, but it started an extremely healthy discussion, I think, and I'm grateful that Alpine had the courage to do that. Tell me your name, I'm sorry.
Terry Rhodes.
Terry. We'll go with Terry, and then we'll go with Brittany.
Just for example, don't most, especially large LEAs in the state, have foundations where large donations to the, or even small donations to the LEA go through that creates a buffer, so to speak, for the person giving the donation, because that's a 501c3 foundation, set up so that the person giving the donation can have a tax write-off for that donation. But then the donations are held, for instance, in ours, they're held there for like matching grants to teachers or things like that. And any high school fees collected must be collected at the finance office in the high school, not by the coach.
Okay.
But my question to you is, you talked about fees. Some cheerleaders are paying $1,500, others are not. Is that really something you want the public to know, names of students who have fee waivers?
I do want to know, because I think it's grossly unfair to people who are just above fee waiver level too, to expect their families to come up with $1,500 and others to come up with nothing. Or, I mean, what are we doing charging so much to begin with? I think that creates a healthy discussion. So I guess I'm okay with saying the cheerleading squad had 16 members, 7 paid $1,500 and 9 paid 0. If that data is disclosed, I think that's healthy.
So without names?
Absolutely without names.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely without names. Brittany?
I guess my question is, when we talk about school level reporting, I think the intent generally was, are students across a large or any LEA receiving equitable access to quality teaching and instruction, access to supplies and materials, et cetera? When we get into, extracurricular activities, that is a very local issue. And, and so I guess it's, what does that have to do with the state level reporting of school, how things are allocated? And so as we have this discussion, I think it's always, we talk about local control for certain issues, but then, if we have something that we want, it's like all of a sudden local control no matter isn't important any longer. But it's how do we ensure that those decisions are made on a local level, reported at a local level, and if there's concerns that they are addressed at a local level, that conversations can happen with local LEAs. Well, I, as a member or a constituent in a local LEA, I would contact my state board or my local board. I want this information. So anyways, it's just making sure as we go through this, because it costs money to gather data. It costs money to analyze data. It costs money to store data. And so we have to be very careful that we are very targeted at state level information so that we don't start burning pennies in the process just to get more information that actually doesn't belong at the state level. And that's just, we get to opinions and things, it's not always cut and dry, but this, I think, one of those areas where we have to balance what we want personally and what is efficient and most important at a state level.
Thank you, Brittany. I think I respectfully disagree in that I think the main purpose of the state is the transparency, because most of our districts will tell us we do what the state requires and nothing more. And that's kind of a safe harbor for them. That's why I was applauding Alpine School District for actually going the extra mile and disclosing that information about how unfair it was between Orem and Eagle Mountain. I think that's very much the exception. And I think as the sovereign that passes the money down, we do need transparency. And it's absolutely important to quibble about what level of transparency and the cost. But when no one knows that, then I think it's alarming. Brittany.
Some of this money we aren't passing down, and that's where we get into that area of some of this is local money, and the decision-making happens on a local level. And so it's how do we ensure that we are accountable to the state money, correct? That's the minimum school program and those kinds of things. Extracurricular activities, don't always fall into that area. Donations don't, that is local revenue, and I look at the coding, of things. Donations in the budget that I look at the school I work with is called local revenue, right? And we code it as that, and we report it as that, and that's where it comes from, right? And so those decisions are made at a local level. And so all I'm saying is being careful that we make sure as we go forward with anything, that we understand our role at the state level and the purpose of school level reporting, what it was meant to accomplish, so that we don't create a giant monster that costs more than the information is worth. So, but then, you know, if you have a local district, and I don't think there's districts out there who feel this way, but if there was a local district that says we only do what the state requires, then is that really what you talk about all the time, is that local freedom, that local control? I don't think they feel that way. And so I think if you, as a constituent, say, you know, I want this information, they respond to you as a constituent and say, our group, our community wants information, and that's what we would require of that, right? And so I think it's, anyways, I don't want to belabor it, but it's just being careful as we go forward with this school level reporting, when we go with this, that we maintain what is appropriate at the state level, and it can be used and utilized at the state level.
That's fine. We are sovereign. All school districts are derivatives of us. We allocate responsibility to them as we see fit. And it's an excellent debate over to what extent we should allocate that. And it should be challenged every time, and I welcome it.
And I
Brittany?
would slightly disagree with the whole sovereign analogy, but because there are different responsibilities, and each LEA is an elected, they have an elected board that has some of their own autonomy and taxing authority. And so to say that, you know, that we control or are sovereign over each individual LEA, I think is incorrect. And like I said, this is a philosophical discussion. It's exciting to have, bring it into finance, less cut and dry. But anyways, I'm just saying, it's just being careful that as we have these discussions going forward, that we are cautious of our role at the state level and not create a monster that is expensive and costly and really, quite frankly, may not belong at the state level.
Thank you, Brittany. Any further discussion on this?
What item are we on?
We're on 1.6. Why don't we do, I think we're done with 1.6, unless anyone has anything further. Let's do the SITLA nominating committee update and then take a break. We are 4 minutes early.
And they're here.
But they're here. Whoa. Distinguished alumni. Welcome. Yes, please. Introduce yourselves.
So, my name is Jennifer Johnson. I'm happy to be here. I'm representing the SITLA nominating committee as its chair. And with me is the chair of a subcommittee that is working on the search for the replacement, to nominate to you for potential appointment, for the replacement for the director of the School Children's Trust section. And we were invited here by you, and we're happy to be here.
I'm Jonathan Bates. I am a member of the SITLA nominating committee. As Jennifer stated, I've also been asked to be the chair of the subcommittee for the search. I am the executive director of real estate administration for the University of Utah, so my role at SITLA is as their beneficiary representative. And I'm excited about this opportunity and also about the challenge that it represents.
Can I provide just some information that might be helpful to the committee? Not everybody remembers that there are actually several trusts, not just one trust. And the largest, of course, is that representing the schools. But there is also beneficial interest in the Utah Schools for the Deaf and Blind for 2 trusts. There's also the beneficial interest of Utah State University and the University of Utah. And Jonathan fills that spot right now. They're also sitting on the nominating committee besides representatives of the beneficiaries' user groups, so like farms and mining, et cetera. And so that kind of composes this nominating committee of 11 members. And our interest is in protecting nominating members for the boards of trustees of the SITLA board. There's a separate nominating committee for the SITFO board, where there's the board of trustees for the fund. This is kind of an interesting assignment via statute to us because we're looking at the director for the School Children's Trust section, which includes both the SITLA interest, the SITFO interest, and then also the administration of the School Lands Trust program.
comments or questions? Do you have anything
Well,
further? Mark?
yes, if we could. Can you give us an update? That was a big.
Sure. So we
the
had
big mystery.
First
First of all, before we get there, appreciate all that you've done. It's moved very well. I think that as you put the job duties together and responsibilities and refer to statute, I think you guys listen to all the different stakeholders in this, but you've got a really good package out there. So just thank you for that work, and I think you've done it in a very timely manner. So we're ready for your updates. So I just want to get that thank you.
So we, a lot of that work has been supported by staff here at the state offices. And so we appreciate the support and transparency that they've offered. We actually had a meeting this morning with the subcommittee and got an update from our HR and recruiter with the state. The posting is live. They've gotten about 56 applications. She has done some cursory review of those and feels like there's some valid candidates there. As a subcommittee, we've not yet reviewed those applications, so I can't really comment on the quality of those at this time. But 56 in 2 weeks feels good. I think we're hoping for a few more. And we're meeting sometime the week of the 13th to really start going through those applications more in depth.
So what we expect is kind of the process going forward is that the search committee will queue up a number of candidates for the full committee to interview. And the full committee then will look at those resumes and say, yes, we think they are worthy enough to spend our time as a committee interviewing and we'll go forward. If it comes to the point that we look through that and we think, it's really not going to be time well spent, the state board's probably not going to have its needs met, that the trust won't be adequately protected by the competencies of the individuals that have applied, we will let you know of that, and the committee will make that kind of determination. So at that point, we would come back to you and say, hey, we think we need more help than the more limited scope of connections that are had by the state recruiter versus a national recruiter. The expertise expected for this position, both in statute and in the letter from the state board requesting us to open up this search, are extensive and hard to find all in one individual. It's not an easy mix to find somebody that knows a lot about mining and also a lot about funds management. That's an interesting cross. It's possible, but we're going to do what we can do. And also that knows a lot about politics. Because it's not common for people that are in those areas to also cross into politics and understand how to deal with a legislature and a state board and some of the very political nature of the trust. Presuming that we have an adequate pool to interview, we'll interview them, and then a statute requests that this committee presents a name for the board to consider whether it wants to appoint that or not. The board at that point could say yes or no, I presume in closed session, and at that point would either appoint or come back to us and say, we think you need to look for a different candidate if we don't think this suits us. So our role by statute is to serve the state board that way.
And Jennifer, when do you hope to have that named to us? By what board meeting?
I haven't begun to try and put together a meeting of the full committee following this process, but it would be the first 2 weeks of December. I'm a little bit worried because December can be very, very busy, but this is our time frame. I wanted to make you aware that quite a number of the members of the SITLA nominating committee have their terms expire at the end of each year. And the State Board of Education nominates several of those candidates, but many also are placed there either by their associations or by the governor. And so that's something that we're trying to be conscious of because we think it's nice to have some continuity through this process. As an example, my term would be up on the 31st of December. I want to make you aware that you have it would be wise for you to be considering, what you want to do going forward. Because you only have a couple meetings left in the year to be able to make that sort of appointment. I'd be happy to serve even for a few months if the search spilled into the next year, and I think that I think Jeff Moss also.
Yeah, Jefferson Moss is
who's a representative in the House.
There's 3 of them.
Yeah, so I know that Dan Griffiths and Neil Walter, their terms don't expire, and so they are some of your representatives that would continue on. Jonathan will be continuing to serve. It's one of the great strengths of him leading the subcommittee is that he can help with that continuity. So you might want to be thinking about what you want to do. Maybe you want to kind of, queue somebody up, or now as soon as you can, or say, hey, we want to defer our appointment, and ask for an extension of service by Jeff and Jennifer, or maybe just one. You might want to ask Jeff what he would want to do, given that he serves in the House in the legislative session, I think, quite soon. So anyway, those are some things to be cognizant of.
Excellent. Anyone have any further questions or comments? Thank you, Jonathan and Jennifer. We appreciate your service. And I think the children of Utah are well served by your diligent efforts. It's quite a resource we have.
And good luck looking for someone with knowledge of this kind of a trust, and the investment knowledge makes a huge change.
It is a challenge.
If I may just add this, I think that this is something I should have shared. I think that this is a different search than in the past, given that the trust fund has much greater profile, given the legislative changes that happened in between the last time that this position was filled and now. The trust is now over $2 billion. In my professional experience, I find that when you're dealing with funds that are securitized, it's much easier for there to be malfeasance where the money's just gone when you seek redress through litigation. Whereas when there's litigation on land, the land hasn't gone away. It may have been used differently, but the land is still there. And so Jefferson also has some background and expertise in this area, and so we have placed some additional emphasis on trying to look for somebody that understands this part. I would consider, in my opinion, where the greater risk is for protecting the trust, and not just malfeasance, but also inappropriate risk taken or too little risk taken on a $2 billion portfolio would deeply impact the ability of this trust to be able to provide benefits. So,
Thank you.
Yeah, the last time that this was done, there was no SITFO. And so SITFO has a huge impact on county schools.
it may be therefore the case that we get a candidate that knows more about funds and more peripherally about the other things. We'll just have to weigh and get you the best candidate we can.
Encourage you to hire someone as smart as you do. Ted, what are you doing? Why don't you?
Well, upstairs in the superintendent's office is my 6-month-old baby girl. And she was asleep, and I had my niece meet me here to just watch her while I was giving testimony to this committee. So if anybody wants to take a break and peek at her in my
investing
I am 100% vested in her.
That's your new investment, isn't it?
It is. Anyway, thank you for your time. I think concludes our testimony.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for your time and commitment and your service on this. We're really excited to, and congratulations on these numbers. Hopefully there's more to choose from.
Thank you.
Yes, we're going to go into a break now. It's 10:07. Let's be back by 10:20.
So, well, what do you want? Oh, I need some smart. I didn't get them. Do you want to do that as well? How long is the break? So, you mentioned USDB, $1 million. So that's what it went to. So I'm the IT director. So it's $50,000 a year. So, and the reason they did that is because it's Medicaid stuff, and a lot of this firing doesn't.
No, I understand. So is the context
Right.
So here, he wants to know if it expires. design is kind of more our.
They were clean today, that's what.
Honestly, we're not developing any new features because we're worried that, you know, they're gonna look at us and competing and then they're gonna take it away and privatize
I
it.
know.
So we're just doing the basics to keep it up and going.
I know, Brent was the guy.
Yeah.
I smoked stuff.
Oh, did you?
I came to look at his fire, I thought it was amazing. I understand how Granite uses their discovery and training. And when I reached out to those two people,
We tried to
you
think
know,
of it as you go, but.
we're just like, we don't want to have to pay for Aspire anymore. But I'm like, you know, here you have these SSI systems who are in Utah, and so exactly what they said was you know, and so I'm like, why, what would be the detriment of just having this system? It's like, wouldn't that be better? I mean, we're also.
So how does Nevada get away with it?
I think it was Nevada. I mean, sometimes I get different
No.
programs confused in my head,
Yeah.
but there are certain states that
Have their own.
So, yeah, that, I kind of brought that up because,
Okay. No, that
and I
makes
wanted
sense,
to
yeah.
kind of go on record so that, you know, why
Why are we doing
this?
it?
When we have something that is illegal, so Granite says that they like that their finance system has Canyons also said that they could put their finance, which is fine.
See, we could do something similar here if we have
I know.
the backing to do it, not controlled by, you know.
The other thing is, I'm always trying to get
Right.
No, that worked, because I was like, okay, no, that's nice.
I want to, because I can stay.
Well, see, we have Utopia too, which is the adult education version of SIS, of
Yeah.
Aspire.
Yeah.
And see, so we're maintaining two separate systems.
Yeah.
But we're afraid to integrate them.
Yeah.
I mean, we haven't, I just brought that up, so I don't know if they've thought about it
Yeah.
before.
Uh-huh.
Just because we don't wanna make this a feature-rich
Yeah.
application and then they them come in and say, well, you are getting more now because you're building all these other features into it, so.
You know, I'm gonna look back, cause I could have sworn I saw a line item. Check my I thought it was
Well, it's, yeah, I don't know where it came from, but
Okay.
it is, because I was on the RFP
Yeah.
for it, and it's 50 grand, about 50 grand a year, and I think it's a 5-year contract. But, yeah, I mean, then we're maintaining, you know, we support Power School and Skyward here, and integrating it into Utrex
Yep.
that collects all the student data. So,
And you know, and then we also look at that meta,
yeah, the data dictionary.
yeah, it's like, so here we are creating a data dictionary.
Yeah.
And then we had Aspire, and then we're like, oh, let everybody choose their own crap, we're just gonna put them out. I'm like, why are we having so many different?
Well, so I'm putting together, right now, there is like a product data sheet for each one. We're up to
Yeah.
30 applications that we developers support.
Yeah.
And so, you know, some people say, why do you have 50 Well, it's because we have 30 applications that we support. Then we have an IT, you know, we have all the operations side of it. And, you know, the other week, we got 500 and some calls for
Yeah.
Aspire support from all the LEAs.
Well, and that was also part of what I was saying, was that, you know, here you're asking us to bring in all this information from so many different programs, that takes time, money,
Right.
and people.
Yeah.
And so like, if we're going to allow that flexibility, then we need to support it here, and we're not supporting it here.
Right.
We're not putting it up on here's and that's the option for me.
Yeah.
Because it could be better, and we should be making decisions with that, and not just whatever.
Yeah. So my goal for the board is to show you guys what we do down here, because I don't think everybody understands the complexity.
Yeah.
I mean, because I was looking at it from the outside, Scott would call me and say, hey, what do you think about this? And I'd say, well, we've got a lot of people down there, what are they doing?
Yeah.
And he didn't know, because
Yeah.
there wasn't that communication. And so,
Yeah.
now that I'm here, I'm like, wow, you know, there's a ton of stuff. I mean, we got Aaron that came down, and they're doing a lot of these can be fixed with
Yeah.
efficiency, and
Yeah.
we're gonna work on that,
Yeah.
but there's a lot of work to do.
There's a ton of
So,
work down there, and I mean, because I run 2 schools and I have like 6 programs, I only can imagine, I mean, just keeping the programs running, like just keeping like,
Yeah.
it's a lot, you know, I mean, some days all day, it's like, you know, like
Right.
data entry or something like that, and just tweaking it constantly
Yeah.
as you're going, and just, like checking a box that wasn't checked, it's like, you have to go find that box. It's not just checking the box, it's learning which boxes didn't separate, you know, so. I'm very fan of that.
No, I appreciate, I knew that from the first time I met you, so I appreciate that, so.
And sometimes it's not just asking for money, it's and that question is asked.
Yeah, okay, that makes sense. I'm new to this whole process, so it's good to.
I'm new to it too. I realize that when you just say something like, it doesn't sound as much.
Yeah.
Kind of ask a question.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, if there's
No, that's
anything I
good.
can please do that, because I
No,
just.
my goal is to be as transparent with, so, because I don't think that's been the case, you know, as far, and maybe it has, I don't know, but,
And like seriously, if I get it the most, that's pathetic, because that's what you know, seriously, like,
right.
I'm telling you, like, I get it, but like, you get it, you know, and I'm like, what I know about data is like your fingernail, you know, and I'm like, oh my gosh, you guys are doing so much work, it's ridiculous.
well, yeah, it's hard, and so next month, I think we're on the docket to, as far as security goes, so the 4 pillars that
Yeah.
was given,
Yeah, and they just have to be
website, and security, and security's another thing, we have one guy
I know.
handling security, so we're having to go out and do co-managed services with another company that monitors like the overall, because we get hit all the time trying to, you know.
Well, that was just,
trying to
I
whatever.
almost sent out that article that talks about how schools are a soft target and these are a soft
yeah.
target. But when I'm on first, right, as a teacher, I used to give you the card, the social security number was there, the credit number was there.
You being serious?
Yes.
Don't they pause it?
Should always pause it. I should stop.
I didn't even know about that.
Well, yeah.
We didn't say that.
Say a little bit. That's okay.
Sorry, I didn't have, you didn't text me.
Oh, I'm
Oh,
sorry.
you did. Did you hear it? Really?
We did that last year too.
We didn't say our names, so they don't.
That's all right. Well, I was just saying, I'm trying to get all the cards. There's an article on it. But then I sent it back. That's okay. Nobody listens to it, that's not anyway. I know, what's the craziest thing? Nobody listens to it anyway. Michelle was like, I tried to listen, but I have to more. I find it very engaging. So, nobody listens to it. You have to very deep on their website. Different mics. Well, you know, we need to turn this off.
No, well, they are.
You did this. we need to remember to turn our mics off before we start. No, I'm not gonna let you do anything.
That would be prudent. We have.
You crawl under the table.
Yeah.
He has a unique skill set.
Let me turn my chair away.
I still climb trees. I think it's fun.
Well, look, I almost have a scraped knee from my bike ride last week. So I'm with you, Angela, I'm with you.
I think that's kind of cool, Board Member Reed. We have completed items
Did a Band-Aid.
up to and including 1.6. So we only have items 1.7, 8, 9, and 10. So maybe we'll even get done on time or early, going out at other board committees that aren't as efficient as we are. We'll mention we start an hour earlier.
Let's not brag too quick.
Well, we did 1.8 already because Natalie talked about it, so let's just jump right over that one. I'm just kidding.
So we are on 1.7, corrective action for non-compliance with statutory reporting deadlines. Who has been not compliant? Natalie?
So we put this agenda item obviously on the agenda before we had everyone cleared through. So just a quick update. As of I think this week, the last of the 2 school districts that hadn't certified their AFRs and APRs got their information in. That's good. That makes us very happy. They were still a month late, and so that's an issue. The only thing I wanted to bring forth with the committee, at this point we have all of the LEAs who we had reported in the previous month being non-compliant. They are now compliant, and so we're okay to move forward. However, for those LEAs who were late, we have to move forward with calculating the budget. We can't wait for them to submit data. And so those LEAs who certified late, we had to use prior year numbers for them. It's likely that their districts won't change substantially. However, because we're calculating a budget based on prior year numbers, 2 prior years numbers instead of just last year's numbers, that could bump us into some issues. So we don't have everything cleared through or certified. We still have to run the added checks on the things that they submitted. And I just wanted to make you aware of that in case it came up in the future. We're not recommending corrective action at this time, but the lateness is an issue, and those deadlines are in place on purpose for a reason. And so we have to work around them when people don't submit on time. So that's all I have, unless you have any other questions.
It seems like, I'm afraid is sometimes that when we want to punish people, we have to create the punishment at the time. And if we had just something more automatic, like, okay, you're late, it's fine, whatever reason, here's the penalty, here's the penalty, here's the penalty, and it just happens automatically. And so that it's not, it's you know, and obviously you wouldn't lose 100% of your funding if you're 2 minutes late, but it could just be something reasonable, like, I don't know, Royce, would you like to come? This just seems absurd.
They could come fix our sprinklers.
They could come fix our sprinklers, possibly. I mean, it could be more automatic, because it's shocking to me that they wouldn't know their enrollment number on October 1st. Royce?
This is not directly on point, but it does seem relevant. Last month, when you talked about this, we discovered that there were several charter schools who had not submitted a number of reports on time. I suspect that's part of what prompts this discussion. I was surprised as I spoke to several of those charter schools who had been received communication, I don't know from where, but several of them heard the same thing, that some of those reports were due roughly a month later than when they were actually due. And so that's been taken care of, but I just wanted to make you aware that somewhere there was a miscommunication that prompted some of those late things. Once they found out that was not the case, I think they were very prompt in taking care of it. But as you're thinking about that, you probably also need to be aware that at times that can happen just because there's a miscommunication between the LEA and the office here. So.
Now, you're saying that the non-compliance is manageable right now? I mean, if it's not causing real problems, I guess we'll just deal with it, but.
I believe it was only manageable because they were very small school districts. If it would have been Alpine, we would have been completely stalled until they finished their reports. And so largely sometimes the manageability depends on the size. With October 1, so this item was largely related to the class size report and the APR and AFRs. The APRs and AFRs have information in it about tax collections, about exclusions from local replacement levies. It's not just the head count piece. We were able to get everybody getting their head counts in. The communication that Mr. Van Tassel indicated, I believe it was our charter school section who sent out a calendar with a date that was different than the one that was sent out in the instructions. I think that that's what we have discovered. Regardless, the date was clearly listed in the instructions, and that email was sent out a few times. So it's been rectified. We're grateful for the assistance of the association that was able to help us get those reports in. The amount of time that it takes my staff to call and make phone calls and make more phone calls and answer emails and take down the system to do resubmissions. We had to have a large number of our school districts, I would say probably half, resubmit some property tax information this week in order for us to complete the local replacement calculation. We actually have a meeting with the CDC this afternoon to finalize a good portion of the budget numbers. And as you can imagine, when someone submits and certifies 2 days ago, that gives us no time to go back and work through those things. So we have to make a decision early on what data points we're going to use and how we're going to use those. Unfortunately, our decisions are all result in, if we use data from the LEAs that we know is incorrect, it results in reduced funding for LEAs or implications for the individual students in classrooms. And so we make every effort that we can to communicate with our LEAs and get their assistance. We're going to try a different kind of communication next year. Get in front of you ASBO earlier, write some instructions about how we use the data that comes in with the AFRs and APRs, and hopefully that will help. But I think Jamie in the last week has called at least 25 school districts, 20 something, getting data corrected. So it takes a lot of time. So that's all.
Margaret? This was on my to-do today, but this is a good opportunity for me to just do it today. The one thing that we get these excuses, I hear all these excuses. Royce shared some, well, they didn't really know, there's some confusion. And then there's some that do know. I'm talking about LEAs and staff. I'm going to drill down if it's a superintendent or business administrator, but they make choices. And they choose what to do, when they do it, and how they do it. And as I've talked to the local boards and board president and board members about this, they say, well, we'd like to know if we're not giving the state what we need. And so I think we have a challenge because it just keeps reoccurring. Mm-hmm. And one of the big challenges, or a proposed solution to all of this, is can we at USBE come up with a calendar that has these submittal dates? Now, the advantage of having a calendar, and it's a request for submittal, not request for finance. These are submittals that this office demands by statute and policy to have, and it goes on this calendar of a due date with not our absolute. There's some soft time in there so that we have opportunity to do our work. So we set these due dates, and it's setting an expectation. This is a minimum expectation that we have for every LEA. Big district, little district, charter school, and this calendar is just not on the finance side. This is all of the sections would participate on putting this calendar together. And I can't see why and as I talk to superintendents that I've seen on these little lists, and that also complain about the submission of data, and then we just sent that report like this last month. A couple wins could come from this. One is that as sections, and our superintendent can operate this way with all the section leaders, come in and say, okay, all this data's coming, so why can't you get this data that this section's asking for? Can't you reach over and get it instead of having separate submittals put in? And I think if we calendared this and listed it out and inventoried it, that two things could come from this. We would minimize the redundancy and we'd increase efficiency. And have clarity on managing everyone's expectations of shipping and receiving. Local boards and board presidents and that they would have access to this. When if their VA and staff can't get this done in a timely manner, then that local group can say, well, we're gonna have to get some temp service, or we get some contract service. There's gotta be some new awareness of what it is that we want here. And so I'm just throwing this out as maybe a possible solution, and maybe as an information request to come back to us, and maybe we can start it in finance. And superintendent, I'm talking about a USBE submittal calendar that goes out to every LEA that references the sections that are asking for data and information. And let's just get this right so we don't have these excuses. And so these new schools that are on, or these new LEAs that are onboarding, they know exactly what it takes, what's going to be required of them, and when. And so I'm throwing that out as a potential solution, and maybe we can get with that. So I throw that on the table.
Natalie?
So I've actually put up the calendar that's on financial operations website. Obviously, that's a small subset of the dates and requirements, and so I think there's definitely room and improvement for putting together an overall one that includes all the data collections, all the statistical reports, any collection that may come with the sections. I do know that we are not the only section that has these due dates up. This has been on our website for quite a while, but obviously it's under financial operations, and as a local board member you might not know to go look there for a report calendar. So I think that the legwork has already been done. It would just take somebody consolidating all of those into one place. So
Superintendent.
So I apologize, I'm hopping today with all the different items on the agenda. But, so this is what I was talking about in my board report yesterday that we were working on. And when we were talking about this in superintendency, it's as you've described, in terms of having monitoring on their financial reporting, so it's more comprehensive, because all those things overlap. We also talked about displaying it in a place that's easily accessible in a calendar format. So if I click on November 1, that I'm not looking to finance for a list, and I'm not looking at federal programs, but I click on it and I actually see a calendar format that has everything listed on there, and I think including board meetings and other things that would be pertinent to LEAs. So that was kind of the vision.
Might throw in. I think that's great, but we get too much calendar stuff in
It's
there.
all for the BAs and superintendents, so they would know what this is about reporting.
Okay, very good.
But sometimes we have to get the reports for you by board meeting, so if they know that board meeting's on there, it's also a reporting feature.
I think Janet had something, but can I follow that?
Mark and then Janet.
So superintendent, would part of your mission be, as you're going to sections and working with the different sections, it is claimed, but I haven't seen evidence of it, that there's this redundancy of information. It's partially here, it's partially there. Is there a way on the submission side that if we're getting pupil data, whatever, instead of entertaining things by section, that we say, okay, financial data, all the financial data these are the dates it's due, send to my office, then my section will take it. And then if it's student, if it's private, just a different things, so that we have simplicity in this. And also, while we're the fine tuning this is to collaborate openly with the BAs and the superintendents to say, we want this to be a simple tool for you on minimize, to create efficiency and minimize any redundancy.
I think there's another step as well, that in Leadership Council, we need to bring the calendar there and have the discussion internally. So if Natalie has a report coming up, for example, and maybe another section is monitoring, then we can say what is requested. Somebody else might say, oh, you know what, I already have that information. Now, the right system, I'm sure you talked about that before I got in here, the right system will help with that. As we work towards more of an end-to-end accounting system, a lot of that can be drawn out. But the conversation needs to first happen in-house of, are we collecting redundant data? And if so, how do we mitigate that by shipping another section, the data that we have?
It seems like it's already in the works. So.
Yeah.
Just make a quick comment. This is such a great idea, but I know one problem that will come from it is that people will say, well, I read this list, I did everything on here, and now you're saying that I'm not in compliance. Because even if we create a list, we can't replace the law. Whatever the law says, or the code says, is what people have to do. So we can create a summary, but any derivative of the original document will inevitably be less than perfect. So I probably just, I like this idea, maybe I'm too lawyerly, but I want a disclaimer at the end, just saying, this is for convenience sake, we hope you use it well, you still have to follow the law.
But don't, when you say the law, the statute and the rule, we are the law and the rule. So our requests follow the law. They feed this machine. They feed us. They don't submit to the legislature. They don't create something and stash it in case the legislative police come in because of some statute that they may or may not have to report on. We are it. This is my understanding in that documentation and submittal process, any state law.
Any summary will not be as comprehensive as the whole thing.
Well, I'm not after a summary. When data comes in, it comes in a format that if other sections like the superintendent is talking about it, they need this data, instead of going and requesting it again from somebody said, we already have it. They have that knowledge. We're not putting that extra burden on them. We're supposed to be the smartest guys in the room. And when the superintendent has her meetings in there, and so if we already have it.
Speak for yourself.
Well, we're supposed to be, and when I say we, I'm saying our staff, and that is requesting all of this. So.
All right, Natalie.
I think that perhaps some of the confusion or concern that's coming from the field and from our LEAs is that there are monitoring requests being made from the Department of Workforce Services for grants that are received by our LEAs. There are audit requests and information requests coming from the state auditor's office, from the legislative auditor's office, and to the LEAs, they're all the state, and so we're all the same thing. And so we can make efforts on our end to consolidate our efforts and to not duplicate, absolutely, but we can never control those other outside parties, and there's confusion at the LEA level as to who is who and why and what they're asking for and why is this group asking for something you guys already have. Obviously, we try to coordinate as much as possible anytime we're aware of audit requests being made by other entities, but we aren't always privy to those requests, and so we do the best we can, but we can't.
The education side of those separations.
Super.
A good example of that, when I was in Davis last week on my visit, the VA indicated that he had 5, he called them audits, but there was really monitoring and a bunch of things around special education. Well, one of those was they were on our rotation for special education monitoring out of our office, required by our improvement plan with the federal government. They also had a federal monitoring. They had something with, I think, part of an audit from our end, and another one that was actually a reporting feature. But those would have been very different entities and data sets, so that's not something we can really mitigate. If 3 of those were ours, and we're looking for the same data, then that would have been important. However, if there's a calendar function and Leah and Natalie were both at the table, and let's say Debbie, if the 3 of them were at the table saying, oh my gosh, we are looking for 3 things out of Davis District in regards to special education. Let's get together and see what is the common data that we need to find and what are some outliers. And then we go in with one team looking for all of those things. That's how we would see mitigating it.
Kathleen?
I think the calendar is a great idea, and I think a benefit of that would be, these are the things that we're asking for on a certain track. And then when they say, oh, USBE is asking for 7 things, it's like, well, really, what's on the list? That's what we are asking for. So it also will help LEAs distinguish that it's not us asking for all these things all the time, it's other people. So that would kind of give them a reminder that this is what's required by us, but the other things are required by other agencies.
Can I just, the purpose is to find a betterment in our process, so we're not having this conversation of why LEAs are not turning really important, timely, have a real important, timely submittal, that, because a lot of this becomes optional because it doesn't feel like it's weighted a certain way. It doesn't seem like it's this high priority. And I think, we can talk about all we want about they're overwhelmed, they didn't know, they're new, whatever, but we can mitigate that a little bit, I believe, by calendaring, reminding, prioritizing. We hit UASBO and we hear what they had to say, and we have our typical part of this. It's confusing,
So what would you like to, instruct staff to look at this and bring it back to our attention maybe in a month or 2?
I think it would be, I wouldn't mind having it on our next finance agenda. Just an update, or what do we want to do, how the superintendent might format it or something.
So just
Already happening.
A report of what we're doing. We'll come back to you.
Okay. Sufficient? Okay, I agree, especially with the smaller school districts and the charter schools, I'm sure. Well, actually, even with the big ones, they might get as lost as we do with what's happening. Okay, is there anything else then on 1.7, Natalie?
No.
Okay, 1.8, which I think is very interesting.
So while Jamie comes up, I will put some items. Which one do you want, the summary?
Has everyone reported? Have all LEAs reported? Is the first question.
The head counts, yes.
Good.
Yes, we can't proceed with the budget until all the head counts come in, so.
Oh my goodness, this is making me so excited. Can I have this on an Excel sheet so I can manipulate it too? I really do want it on an Excel sheet.
Are
I'm
you
disseminating.
building them?
We have Excel sheets, so.
Oh, thank you.
Extra one.
Does anyone need some readers?
How pretty this is.
I'm the only old person. Right?
You read it like
I don't know.
pop on pop.
This is so fun to see Jamie with you.
I know, we printed it in book format,
What is this?
so. I know.
It's this fun thing they call paper.
I go your paperless day.
Jamie Barrett, the Minimum School Program Administrator. Just wanted to give you an update on how the October 1st, 2017 head counts ended up and our results from that, and then also how the CDC process is coming along with the projected fiscal year 19 head counts.
And CDC stands for?
CDC is our Common Data Committee. It's made up of members of the Tax Commission, the Governor's Office, the Legislative Fiscal Analyst's Office, and our office. And economists from all of those divisions come together and we try to project what we think not only the assessed valuations are in all of our counties in our state, but also where we think students are going to show up in which counties, and then take those populations and disseminate those back down into schools within those counties. And so the one-page summary is just kind of a highlight for you, kind of gives you a breakdown of everything that's on the big colorful sheet, so you can have kind of a snapshot of what's going on in time. Basically, the CDC committee has finished the tax valuations for 19. We've also finished the head count projection, how many new students that we think will come into the system in fiscal year 19, which is 7,681 students. Of that, we are projecting 3,411 in districts and 4,240 in charter schools. That is an increase in student population of 1.18% for fiscal year 19. That is compared to 1.22% this year that we're currently in. So we are kind of starting to decline a little bit, and that is representative also with the birth data that we have. Our birth rates for our state are starting to decline also. Just some other highlights. Oh, sorry.
Brittany?
So when you said last year's was 1.22%, was that an accurate projection?
So that's actual, that's the
That's
growth,
the
that's the
actual
total
growth.
statewide growth of students.
What was projected?
So if you, this middle tab on the sheet, I've done a 5-year comparison of how well our projections came to our actual student head count that came in. So last year, we under-projected by 851 kids. This year for fiscal year 18, we over-projected by 2,218 students, which means the MSP program has balances in it, which makes me super excited. The last couple of years, we have under-projected. If you look at fiscal year 16, we under-projected by 4,253 students, which almost gave me a panic attack. So I welcome having funds in the minimum school program, because that only means that we have money available in case weird anomalies show up in data or with school. So this year, much better than 2 years before. So, and then also the colorful sheet breaks it down by individual LEA. So you can kind of see where the projection has come in for that individual LEA based on their actual head count and whether we were over or under. This data gives us kind of a trend analysis. So when we go into those CDC committee meetings, if we are continually under projecting an LEA or over projecting an LEA, we have the ability to kind of modify those head count projections, so we can make sure that we're adding growth to the areas that are seeing growth, and those that are seeing declines, we can adjust those.
So,
Sorry, Kathleen.
so this is so exciting. Where are we seeing the most growth, and how are we preparing for that? And like, I can see that some of these are stagnant because they just are built to capacity. What are some of the surprises that we're getting from this, and how?
Areas like Cache, Juab, some of those counties that, I mean, we see normal growth along the Wasatch Front in Utah County.
Yeah.
But now we're starting to see growth in the surrounding areas of those counties that are starting to actually pick up. And that's also the same with evaluations. Those areas are also increasing, which is drawing more people to those areas and increasing student population. So not only in the main area down the Wasatch Front is growing, and the Utah County area and Washington County, but we're also now seeing growth in kind of the surrounding counties, which is good.
We also continue to, even though there's a large number of charter schools that are opening in the Jordan district, we continue to miss their head counts every year, even though we keep adjusting them. So
we missed them by, I think, a little over 1,000 kids this
Jordan?
current, Jordan School District, even though they've had new charter schools open in that area and have some more open in 19, they're still seeing a ton of growth in that area.
So even though we have, like, if it's Jordan, wouldn't you project the number into Jordan and then just move the number over? So that would it would make us solvent with that, or has there been a problem with that?
There's a process that we go through in the CDC committee, trying to figure out where we think growth will happen by county.
Okay.
And then we use those numbers to then disseminate that information. And so of the schools that make up Salt Lake County. We try to figure out where we think the growth is gonna hit, based on, birth data coming in, migration data, kids coming into the state that weren't here before. We have homeschoolers that we still see that are coming back into the public education system. And trying to have data around those points has been difficult because we don't track that information. And so it's an estimate every year of where we think kids are gonna come in. And we think that when you've got new charter schools coming into an area, you think they're going to help absorb some of that growth. But we've also seen kids going back to the district schools once they've tried out a charter for a year or two. And so trying to have all of that data and guess and try to figure out where exactly a student's gonna show up is a process that we try to refine every year.
So if a school is like right on the border of other counties, does that create a lot of? Okay.
Well, you also have a very large charter. Students bounce from charter to charter quite frequently. And then do you want to highlight the Provo-Tooele difference?
Oh.
Because those are probably pretty large this year.
Yeah, if you look in the gray column, the difference over and under for Tooele and compare that with Provo School District, you'll see that it was almost an even swap between students. And what happened there was a program that, an online program in the Provo School District area that pretty much picked up that program and took it to Tooele School District. So the students in that program followed. And so that's why we have a switch of such an intense population move from the Provo School District area to the Tooele School District area.
In case anyone asks you.
Yeah.
We feel like most of that is one-time growth, and so we won't be projecting the same level of growth in those areas. It's kind of an anomaly.
We made phone calls to double check that and ensure that it is a one-time, pretty much increase in growth this year.
Fascinating. Brittany?
So I'm just trying to understand, so can I ask a few questions about the table? So these numbers represent individual students, correct? Okay. And then, so for Jordan School District, the red over the different years indicates a under projection, correct? And so then you get to the green, the kind of hazy green on the very far right, and this is the CDC projection that for Jordan School District that we are submitting this next year. Why is it lower than the October 1 count?
So growth in a county, so as we disseminate and go through that process, there's also 2 new charter schools opening in the Jordan School area. And so we try to take that into account, that some of that new growth is gonna go to a charter school rather than an actual district schools. And so it is a game that we play every year in trying to figure out and estimate and look into the crystal ball and figure out where a student's going to show up. We haven't perfected it by any means, and know that wherever that student shows up, they will be paid for in that school. That school will receive those funds for that individual.
I was just curious kind of what the process was, because you talked about under projections for years, and then we're going to lower the count for a school that had growth of an under projection of over 1,000 in the year before.
No, I was going to say something else. No, just when we use the projection model, I mean, it spits out a number of total statewide growth by county. And then we have to go through and kind of disseminate that information back down to a school level. But we have a set number of students to use. And so it's trying to say, okay, of the 7,200 kids, where do we think they're all gonna show up and try to assign growth to those areas. It's not perfect by any means, but
It's a fun game, though.
it's a good game.
I use the word fun. The one other thing that I was going to bring up is that if you continue flipping through the pages of this colorful sheet, down towards I think it's the last page, you'll see the new charter schools. These numbers that we use as projections is what formulate how we pay those charter schools in the first year that they open. The schools that are located in Jordan District, and they're not flagged here so you can't see them, but if we were to instead put all those students in the school district and not in the charter, we wouldn't have any money to pay the charter. And we try to be strategic as we make these decisions as much as we can. Getting appropriations in the local replacement area enable us to ensure that we have the ability to uphold the value of the local replacement dollar that goes to the charter school. Just like with a school district, if the students don't come in to this charter school and instead they stay in Jordan District or go to another charter, They're paid at what they end up yielding, if you will, when we do adjustments in November. But having that local replacement appropriation in the restricted line enables us to pay those students if they show up there. During the legislative session, we've been having strategic conversations with legislative staff about, if the counts come in different, like this year we over-projected charter students and under-projected the districts. We have a conversation about whether we need some of those restricted line items moved so that we can uphold the value of the WPU or the voted in board guarantees. And so, again, having this data helps us see kind of how we're doing, what we're projecting. We use this information to come up with a fill rate, if you will, of new charter schools, which is anything but consistent. Some schools open more than they have students for. Other schools don't open at all.
50%.
Some of them are coming in. The average rate is somewhere around 83, percent. But again, if we don't fund those schools with their planned projection, obviously these schoolers are turning these numbers in a year and a half before they are even open. And so it's kind of a guessing game for them as well. And we try to, honor their marketing, honor their ability to gather a location. There is an element of projection in here. There is a little bit of guessing and some real strong wishes that we didn't miss. But that's why we were quite relieved when we saw that we had over-projected this year, because that gives us the ability in all the places where we weren't quite right to make things, to true everything up without harming the system.
Yeah, you're less than 1% off.
Yes. As we look at the charter schools, the charter schools that's closed, you've just taken off the list. Can we keep those on the list so that we can see the trend of?
I thought I kept everybody on here.
Oh.
Have I missed?
They're not alphabetically listed. So
Okay.
Yes, they're by, so like Aristotle's still on here,
Oh, okay.
Kairos is still on here.
Okay, I'm sorry, I couldn't find them because
yeah, they're not alphabetical.
4H and 4J.
So what is on the side? They've got A, B, C, D.
Those
E.
are their LEA phase number. It's a unique number that identifies each charter school in our system.
Oh.
And so every LEA, districts and charter schools have a unique identifier.
how are they listed?
So
Oh, okay.
they're listed by ID. So it's basically when they came on, the charter staff here assigned a number to them, and we started A1 through A9. And then after that year, we decided to go to 1B instead of B1. And then we
Okay.
moved on down the alphabet.
We tried to change it and just number them numerically, and the world imploded.
It took too many systems here that would cause, so we kept it.
We have to reprogram
So I'm
Cactus
sorry,
and
but
Cactus.
yeah.
Do you have this electronically?
I do.
I love that, oh my goodness. Color coded, conditional formula.
I would just love to have the minutes reflect that they projected 654,565. We end up with 652,347. That's about 1/3 of 1% off. Given all the variables here, maybe there's a little bit of luck, but that's okay, we'll take it. I mean, this is better than previous years, right?
Correct.
So
Awesome.
well done. This is huge and complicated, and I think,
She's smiling.
and she's smiling, and looks happy.
I'll take it.
and,
I'll take it.
So let's celebrate for just a moment.
It was a celebration.
Just be grateful. Just be grateful for a second. So many things can go wrong, and they didn't, in the aggregate.
Correct.
I see all my board members diligently looking, so maybe there'll be more questions. We'll just hang on. Maybe they just like reading this, like they like reading their cartoons on paper. That's okay. This is fun stuff. Okay, does anyone have anything else then on 1.8, October 1, 2017 head counts and student projection? Hearing none. Okay, we will go on to 1.9. Natalie, who will take that?
That's obviously time for your board members to request data and information.
Oh, wait, no. 1.9 is class size reduction funding report. My apologies. And then we'll be on to request for data information.
So the class size report that we have put in board docs is just the final version of the one that we presented last month. Really, the only substantial change is that the LEAs who were able to get their information in, we incorporated that into the report. We changed the title as requested. We just noticed yesterday in the minutes there was a request to change some information in the executive summary. Jamie's done that, but I haven't had a chance to see it yet, so we'll get that adjusted, and then it will be forwarded on to the interim committees for consideration. This is largely just information for you to have the most recent version.
Superintendent?
I think it might be an important report if you have any questions or haven't looked at it, to maybe spend a minute in it at some point before interim, in that it's one of the topics of conversation about should we take this money and put it to the WPU. And, you know, it's been a controversial topic for a long time, but it just may come up in the session. I think it's important the board understands. Not that they will use this as a correlation or even the jumping part to make that decision, because that discussion started last year. Well, really, it's been around for a while, but there was intentional dialogue last year with a small group who was looking at that and studying that information, so.
Okay.
I also,
Janet and Natalie?
So it looks like they've got the 3 programs, class size reduction, K through reading achievement, and Title I K-8 funding that are lumped in here. I guess my frustration with the class size reduction is that, well, that it's never been increased, even though the kids have been increased, and it hasn't kept up with growth anyway, and that it really doesn't target class size reduction in areas of the state where class size reduction is a critical problem. And so could you just, you're saying that they're thinking of wrapping this into the WPU. Can you tell us what we would lose? What are the pros and cons of that happening?
Well, Natalie can address with specificity, but I think part of the conversation is that class size reduction sort of had that Hawthorne effect, that money was put into the system and it may have reduced class sizes at one time. But now it's sort of become a fabric, part of the fabric that you can't really show that is reducing class size, to your earlier point. So the discussion is, if this were rolled into the WPU, would that then enable LEAs to have more flexibility about how they use that money to hire personnel or to use intervention programs or what have you? And there are a number of programs that they're looking at, and that there was a small group that studied it last year. I know Natalie and Scott and I were all at the table. The challenge is always when things get rolled into the WPU, then does it diminish programs that you had in the beginning? Well, I mean, it's what, 2.5 to keep the doors open in the WPU generally, and then anything off the top of that generally goes into teacher salaries. Some LEAs have used it for a few other things, but by and large that goes for benefits and salaries. And that's not a bad thing. We're not, it's not something we're judging as being wrong. It's just the reality. So the question is, will that line item that has been targeted, will some people lose out if that gets put in the WPU? And then also, there's always that danger of something that's been a line item, does that then get cherry picked for other programs? So those are some of the concerns. Some of the benefits are local control. But the LEA can say, you know what, this really hasn't made it into class size, but wow, we could really use it for a social worker or for some part-time tutors or for software intervention or whatever. What would you add to that or correct?
I think just a couple of clarifications. So the class size reduction line item does receive the growth funding every year. It's increased for the number of students. Whether that is commensurate with the increased cost of the retirement benefits and salaries that are the expenditures associated with those funds. So most of the LEAs are reporting that they are hiring either teachers or paraprofessionals. One of the elements of the statistical or data report, we also asked the LEAs to show us how much of their own local funds or of other funds that they're contributing in order to fulfill the hiring of these individuals. There really is no statute that says that 100% of the teacher has to be paid for with this specific class size dollar. There are LEAs who are using the funds in inventive ways to make them stretch farther, I believe. And so a lot of it sort of depends on the circumstance of the LEA. As far as the roll up into the WPU, if that were to occur, there are a couple of mechanisms that could be used to do that. Depending upon how it's executed, it will most likely result in a redistribution, to be fair. Right now, the funds are allocated based on K-8 ADM. LEAs who, if you roll it into the WPU, it automatically becomes allocated on K-12. And so LEAs who have a larger or a bigger school population of K-12 students will receive more. And those who have a smaller population of students will receive less. It's just, the pie is still the same size, right? There's just more people now or more inputs into that as the allocation occurs.
And also, Natalie, if I may, just point out that we have high schools that have never received dollars that would. So that's a huge chunk out of our elementaries where this has been targeted. But districts then, and/or charter systems could target that money back to the elementary, so it doesn't automatically have to go K-12. That would be a local decision, right?
Well, if it got rolled into the WPU, there wouldn't be the restriction for the specificity. We wouldn't have to do this report anymore either, which I can't say is the worst thing in the world. So, I mean, it all depends on which policy decision you want to make.
We need more state control, not having to do state reports. Do we have Brittany, and then Kathleen, and then Janet?
So my plays into my data request for today, and so is it okay to, because it applies to this topic, is it okay to ask that now, or should I just wait?
I defer to your good judgment, Board Member Cummings.
I'll let the other questions get asked then, and then I'll wait, because it is
So I would like this not to be rolled up into the WPU, because I just think that it serves a very, very important role. I think that as we work with K through 3 students, it's important to try to get them up to speed by 3rd grade, and I've seen the implications of kids not being able to read on grade level in 4th grade. To address and I'm trying to be really cognizant of the fact that I asked you like all this information almost to make your head explode last time, so I'm trying not to do that again. But as we look at all these districts, we know that there are certain districts that are more highly impacted with a K through 3 reading struggle. And so this is just based on an ADM, but we do have data now that is being provided with our K initiative with the testing. Would it be a Herculean task to start to focus some of this funding towards the actual places that need it, like Janet has mentioned previously? And I mean, like I said, I don't want to overburden you, but is there a way that we can renegotiate how we come up with this allotment? I don't know who's going to, I'm just speaking.
You're speaking into the sky. I do think that's the exciting opportunity to have these conversations, that there's both the opportunity and the challenge, that you have to think about if you change the funding formula, what do you lose, and what do you gain? And so there's conversation, I know, about thinking about, here's a WPU, and when I say conversation, it's also like here, because a lot of people are having these conversations. There was some mention last year, and I'm sure it will come up again this year, of should there be an add-on that is more focused on the kind of targets you're talking about. So you look at particular risk factors, maybe it's poverty, learning English, whatever those factors are that create risk for academic failure, then you put all those together in some kind of funding formula as an add-on. That's a possibility, but I think this is a year where there used to be some of these conversations in committees, I think you'll see more robust and out in the open conversations about all of this kind of stuff. Okay. So yes, opportunity, yes. Challenges to get it right, yes.
Okay. I think the only thing that I would add to that is that there are some LEAs who, exactly as you have indicated, this has become the class size portion at least, has become a base of their funding. they've hired teachers based on this, and if the distribution were to change or to be redirected to something else, they would have to find a resource to either keep that teacher or make a different decision. And some LEAs have the ability to do that and are already forward planning, and some maybe do not. And so those are things that would come up, I think, within individual board members' districts as this conversation furthers. Anytime we can direct new money to an add-on, new money means new opportunities, and that would give us the ability, the LEs and local boards, the ability to make all sorts of exciting and innovative decisions. But if you take existing money and put that into new ideas, there will always be a trade-off. And right.
So,
I think we're Janet next, and then Mark.
So, we have before us this report on class size reduction that's been difficult for you to put together, and then we also have lumped into this the K-3 reading program. Do we have any idea, and I guess this is something we should plan ahead for, maybe now that we have technology to track things, but do we have any idea how successful the K-3 reading has been in terms of helping kids get on a reading grade level by 3rd grade? Do we have any kind of data on that?
So we've just been looking at that. We try to track that every year. The challenge with K-3 reading is that the guardrails for expenditures are so broad that it's pretty hard to determine that those dollars went exactly to this outcome. I mean, it's a fairly large box. We know that most of the money is spent on personnel, but we can't correlate that directly to the outcome for kids because we have a lot of other things that they're doing. So we have the K-3 reading money, we have the intervention software, we have OEK, we have preschool, like we have this smattering of all of these things, and we have legislators, auditors. Internally, we'd like to be able to ferret all of those out. That would take such a significant Research One project, and we don't have the baseline data on it. And we're as frustrated as anyone to be able to, we can't say that K-3 reading money led to Kathleen's students increasing in this, this way.
So that, I guess, for us as a board is significant, that as we move forward or we have an ask, we need to include in that ask some kind of ability to get the data so that we have that information to see, are we making a difference? Is our money, is our investment giving us a good return? Because I hear about that at legislature all the time.
Superintendent and Mark, sorry.
I just want to speak to that just a reminder that one of your asks is for program evaluators and financial analysts. I don't know if that's the right word I'm using, but people who in-house now can permanently work on some of those issues rather than relying on a 3% add-on for an evaluation or, some of the things. We usually do not get any money for evaluation, but we need to do a better job of it.
I just want to speak to some of this early intervention, and you guys know that I'm very much an advocate of it. Almost probably too aggressive. One of the challenges with even with every one of these programs that are in here, they got rolled out, money got spent, and there were times money was spent, people were hired, education is happening. If you go to a principal, or you're going to a local school and you say, we're going to take that money away, and you might not get out of the parking lot, but you have the PTA and everyone else there. I'm serious.
They're all upstairs talking about something.
But you might not. I mean, it's that serious, and the challenge is to if this was at a huge risk, which every year it seems to be, because let's just hit the less paperwork, let's do the easy button and put it up into the WPU. We don't have to look at this anymore. Local control, hey, let's just make it a local control issue. The greater that, it seems like that risk is getting there, and then me personally, I'm like, okay, where's the advocacy for the program? And the advocacy of this program ought to be with the LEAs that are taking the money, they gotta get their act together and say, what is my story? What is really the story? Where's my data? Am I ready to fight for this? And without it, it's not gonna be a very good fight. So I've been an advocate for it. I don't have that, but I've got the stories. So if I've got the stories, then how come I can't go get the data? So I almost have to start early and say, hey, all my local districts, and I have a whole bunch of them here, that absolutely need this money to survive. I've got to get them getting their story hour and their storyline together, supported by data, to make this work. Or it could disappear. But do I do that by myself, or do we say, we're going to hire some people that are going to be way up in this office, just new to this. What are we going to ask them really to do to get down into the weeds and say, well, what's happening here? So I'll tell you what will happen if you pull the money. It will go to the WPU, and it might stay there a little bit. Then the temptation is, well, we've got to put it here and here and here. It shrinks, test scores go down, and then what will happen? They'll say, well, you took our money away, now we don't have that's been the storyline for a lot of years in our history.
Or what I worry about is that the legislature will say, well, we added this money to the WPU side, we don't have to put any additional funding in there.
And so that's my biggest concern as being a early intervention program advocate. So instead of doing this separately, because I feel the risk, and that I'm just throwing it out there. Mark Huntsman, as a separate board member, is probably going to reach out to a couple groups, especially in rural. It might be the service centers or something, saying, are you guys wanting this, and how bad? You better start building a case to save it. Because I'm not going to be able to do it myself.
I believe Kathleen was next. And then
I see your point, Chair Huntsman, but when we look at our story has already been manipulated by our state initiatives. So I can't tell you if something's successful because I'm already told to do something. And so I'm already required to do these reading interventions. So I don't know if I can back off on that one without a penalty and move forward on something else. So my struggle when I hear this is that we want to give them local control, but we've mandated certain things, and so the story has already been manipulated. So how do we allow them to create a story that meets their needs when we are telling them this is what you need to do to be successful? Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. But the requirement is once they took the funding and started things in motion, there wasn't this plan to say, okay, now I need to have X to demonstrate.
Mm-hmm.
I'm
sorry, Chancellor, I need to impose your rule that we received a couple days ago on you. Board Member
Okay, I'm in.
Clemens is
I'm in.
next.
So I'm going to use my best judgment and talk about my data request because I think I've been thinking about a lot of these same things and some things that the same idea, right? So we have a program in place, and the idea of taking it away is problematic for certain areas and certain places. However, when we talk about it can be a manipulated story because we set the expectation, but we don't have the data to really report back. And so we create this cycle where we recognize a problem, we recognize that early literacy is important, right? We know that that's valuable, and yet our WPU doesn't reflect, our WPU allocation doesn't reflect targeted early intervention. We fund kindergarten at 0.55. Correct me if I'm incorrect. We fund 1-8 at 0.95.
So it depends whether you talk about charters or districts. Districts are funded at 1 for grades 1 through 12.
Okay.
And then charters for 1 through 6 are 0.9, and then 7 and 8 is 0.99, and 9 through 12 is 1.2.
Okay.
We don't know.
Okay. So basically my data request is, what would it cost in addition to what the minimum, or the whatever you want to call it, I don't know how to put it. What would it cost to fund K-12 at 1.0 WPU, not including all the add-ons for special education, CT, and all those kind of things. But if we funded K-12 12 at 1.0 across the board, what would it cost, and then how could you differentiate that? So if you took all the money that goes to class size reduction, K-3 reading, OEK, right? How much in addition to those particular amounts would it cost to fund 1.0 for every student in the state? Because then you could still have the flexibility of funding at kindergarten through first grade. You don't even have to use it for a full day kindergarten. You could use it for smaller class sizes. What would a 15 student kindergarten classroom look like if it was funded at 1.0, and what could happen in a kindergarten classroom, right? So I'm not saying that, and so what would the cost be to fund K through 12 at 1.0, and then what would be the difference between all of those targeted interventions for that K, elementary early intervention places, not including things specific to software, because I know that's different, but we could include it maybe as a piece of information. But does that make sense, what I'm asking? And is that data available, and is it a huge ask?
Can I ask a clarifying question? Are you talking all districts and charter schools at 1.0?
Well, that was my original thought. I didn't realize that charter elementaries were funded differently than, and so I guess, what would it look like if every student was funded at 1.0? And but if there is a need for that differentiation, what would that look like? And so,
I've heard a credible business manager of a large school district tell me charters exploit the lower grades, because even though that's how the funding is, it's much cheaper to do the K through 6 than it is the high schools. The high schools that our districts are funded much beyond the 1.2, because all the programs, other things. So in some ways, that elementaries are funding that.
do we have data to back up that a high school costs more than an elementary school when we keep targeting funds towards elementary schools? Do we have data that says it's more expensive to fund a high school? Because they have larger class sizes, they have.
We have data.
Okay.
When we have school level reports, we would have better data.
Okay.
We have a lot of anecdotal data. I don't think that we've been kind of having this conversation surrounding NES as well, and what would be required to put all that information together. Today, I don't have that data.
Okay.
I think individual LEAs could potentially provide it.
Kathleen?
Can I piggyback on Brittany's data request and say that, going from a 0.55 to a 1 is a pretty big jump. So maybe we could find a number in the middle, like 0.8 or 0.75. So 1 could be like we won the lottery, and 0.75 could be mom got a raise, So that might be a better way to look at it, so that we could have a more succinct picture of what it might look like. Because either way is going to be helpful.
And then it would allow, instead of just having the conversation of roll it in or don't roll it in, because if you roll it in, there is all the pitfalls that we've all discussed about losing that funding. But if you roll it in with that targeted funding in that K3 area, then LEAs would have the flexibility. They wouldn't have to report except in their outcomes, which we already have in an accountability system with different ways of reporting. If your students aren't reading in 3rd grade and they're not doing well on test scores, then what is wrong with how you're using those funding? Anyways, and so I think we ask for lots of reports that don't give us a lot of information, and then we have accountability in place that we don't even look at. And so it's what is the point of all of this if we're not funding it adequately? Or, anyways, so that's my thoughts.
Okay, Kathleen?
This is a little outside the scope, but when we look at what's effective in K through 3, we have this reading intervention program. And when you look at the teachers who are most successful with this reading program, they are also the most successful teachers anecdotally in the school. So we take this variable we think it's dependent on them using the program, but really it's dependent on the teacher's ability to use the program effectively. So we also have various variables that are seen as measures that aren't really consistent across the spectrum. So when we look to see does that make sense? So when we look to see who's successful, we say, oh, it's because they've used this program. Well, this teacher is successful with most of the things she does, but this teacher, he might not be successful because he's not so successful. So unfortunately, we've added variables to make it hard to discern which variable is actually creating the most back to that, so.
Okay, anything further? Okay. I believe that that ends. I don't believe we need to take a motion or anything. Okay, we made it through the entire finance committee without, the only motion we made was to approve the minutes. Okay. Now we're much wiser, and public education is better.
Or at least we think.
The border probe will be so short next month.
That's proof that we exist. Okay. Board Member Cummins already started us a little on requests for data or information. Does anyone have anything else?
Yeah,
Jen?
I had the request that we should look into beginning to work with the building board and see if we could get 1 or 2 board members to work on attending those meetings and start building our case to look for a better facility.
Is that a request on the finance committee staff or our board leadership?
Oh.
Kathleen?
I'd like maybe for our staff to start coming up with anecdotal stories about why this is important. Natalie was sharing a story that is, I don't know if she wants to share it again, but there are some security reasons why we want to do this. There's some safety reasons why we want to do this. As we move into a data security world, we need to start recognizing that we need to have secure places for our people to be. And right now, this system is not secure. And when I hear that, I'm like, wow, that's really a good reason why we should start looking to maybe look at the school. I mean, our data is the most important thing we have. And if we can't, provide a location that is secure, then that's maybe should go right to the top. And if we can start having some of these concerns listed, I think we'd have more traction when we go meet with these people.
And going to a building board meeting is a real eye-opener.
I mean, in my short time I was on the Board of Regents, I saw they are extraordinarily good at making the case for their buildings. I think we are all in awe, a little bit jealous of their extraordinary ability, not only to get it from the state, but then to go to donors and others. And
which they can do, we can't.
yeah, develop a real enthusiasm for their building projects. Beautiful names and beautiful buildings, to their credit. I mean, we need to learn something from them.
To create the USBE Foundation so we can start being a 501c3 for us.
Kathleen in charge of that. Okay, I think that's everything. Motion to end.
Adjourn. Motion to adjourn? So we didn't do that.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you.